Winona, thank you so much for joining us. You're one of the professors who investigated Bourassa's claims. Tell us what you found in researching that.
What we found was that Dr. Carrie Bourassa doesn't have a drop of Indigenous blood in her, and that she has been faking her identity for at least 20 years, from the time that I was at First Nations University back in the early 2000s, all the way up to the present.
And is there any reason as to why? Like, do we know why this was going on? Has anybody asked her?
No, I haven't asked her personally. I haven't come across any interviews that have asked her personally, because her position is, and she is standing firm on that, is that she is Indigenous, and she's not seeming to back down on that, even though we have documentation to prove otherwise.
And a number of institutions are defending her. What's your reaction to that? I mean, after all the research you did, you present your case and you see people still drawing that line in the sand and saying we're on this side of it.
Well, that's what happens when you have imposters moving into positions of authority and power. I mean, she holds some pretty heavy positions, both at the University of Saskatchewan and with the Canadian Institute of Health Research. So they're defending her. Their first response was defend her. They're, as opposed to maybe listening to what we had to say and maybe reviewing what we had to share with them, their first reaction was to protect her. And that speaks to their integrity. In the Canadian Institute, CIHR, their position is self-identification is all they need. So they're perpetuating racism. They're perpetuating this intellectual colonialism. They're perpetuating the creation and emergence of pretend Indians.
Yeah.
I dug them yesterday, so.
The controversy reignited debate about the growing number of self-identified Métis in Eastern Canada and what their claims of indigeneity mean for Métis and Mi'kmaq rights and sovereignty.
So we're talking about a social phenomenon here, a social movement. There's something happening.
St. Mary's University professor Daryl Leroux has been researching those in Quebec and the Maritimes who self-identify as Métis.
And what I'm arguing is that the large majority of people who are claiming to be Indigenous aren't Indigenous.
According to Statistics Canada, in 1996, 860 people in Nova Scotia self-identified as Métis. By 2016, that number jumped to more than 23,000. That's 27 times more people in the province who say they're Métis. Leroux calls the phenomenon white settler revisionism.
Not only turning Acadians or French descendants, this happens in Quebec, like I said, it happens in Vermont and New Hampshire, into Indigenous people on the basis of one, perhaps two Indigenous ancestors in the 1600s, but also reconstructing French ancestors as Indigenous for the purpose of becoming Indigenous today.
Leroux traces some of his own roots to Mohawk and Algonquin ancestors, but says that doesn't make him Indigenous.
My family hunts and fishes. We have these stories, these family stories about having long ago Indigenous ancestors, which may come from genealogists who had been in the family, but my family has no relationship with living Indigenous people.
He says claims of Eastern Métis identity are detrimental to Indigenous people who are fighting to preserve their culture, rights, sovereignty, and very existence.
Between 50 and 75% of French descendants have one of, or at least one of, the handful of Indigenous women to marry Frenchmen before 1670 as an ancestor. So first of all, if everybody who had one of those women as an ancestor claimed to be Indigenous today, we're talking in the order of 10 million people.
Leroux figures about 200,000 people in Eastern Canada presently self-identify as Métis. But who are the roughly 25,000 in Nova Scotia? Daphne Williamson is a Halifax lawyer and member of the Southwest Nova Métis Council. She says she's speaking on behalf of 7 out of 8 Métis leaders in Nova Scotia.
We kept our ways, we kept our stories, we kept our beliefs, we kept our knowledge of each other and our way of life within our communities.
Williamson says the Métis of Nova Scotia faced discrimination because of their biracialism, but endured oppression and stigma and developed their own identities and cultures over hundreds of years.
Each community is distinct in and of itself because of the way that it historically evolved. The circumstances, the mix of ethnicities, that were comprised at the time.
Williamson, whose mother is from Cape Sable Island in southwestern Nova Scotia, found out later in life that she has indigenous ancestors, the Wampanoag, from Massachusetts.
My first thing was to understand what that means. What does it mean to be an Aboriginal person? The European view to me is very self-centered and exploitative and divide and conquer, and that's just not the way that I've ever been, and the way that most people in my community have ever been.
Jennifer Adeze, an Indigenous Studies professor at Carleton University who is Métis, says a Métis person is more than someone of mixed ancestry, and that the real Métis Nation developed in the Red River Valley in Manitoba.
When we say that Métis were born on the prairies, it's because we're also recognizing the rootedness of First Nations women in those areas that give rise to a distinct Métis language called Michif and a distinct Métis culture that connects us to the lands we come from.
Williamson disagrees.
The key is it's self-identification. It is the right of self-identification that is constitutionally protected. So it's up to the individual how they want to define themselves and their community of membership.
The Bredor Lake Métis are based here in Cape Breton. According to their website, they were the first Métis in Canada said to be born in Nova Scotia around 1628. We contacted Bredor Lake leader Shane Savory to ask about his community's history.
Chris Bookham's report says it all for all of us.
He declined to go on camera.
You're choosing to get back to me in a few months. Thank you.
Okay, our story is going to run.
Inappropriate answer to real problems going on today. I wouldn't say that political correctness is excessive, too strong. I think this apparent excess is the mask, the form of appearance of its exact opposite. All this apparent fanatical insistence, you use that wrong word and so on, masks the fact that real, actual relations of power and so on remain exactly the same as they are. My problem with political correctness, again, is not that it's too radical, it's that it's precisely not radical enough. It's a fake radicality, and I think this is what makes you tired doing it. That deep in themselves, they know it. We are losing time. We pretend to fight for more justice, rights of women, other races, and so on, but it's all a fake. It will change nothing. We are, I like this phrase, we are active all the time, but ultimately to make it sure that nothing will really change. You know why I'm telling you this? Because sometimes in my works I use this phrase. I consider myself an obsessional neurotic. And I think that this is the definition of obsessional neurotic. Look, how was I in psychoanalysis as a patient? I talked all the time. But you know why? Not that I had so many things to tell to the analyst, but because I was afraid that if I stopped talking for a couple of seconds, the analyst may ask me a question which would really hurt me, which would really touch some crucial point. So I literally talked all the time to make it sure that nothing will really change. That just to avoid any traumatic stuff and so on and so on. And I find something similar with this constant search of political correctness, but you use this wrong phrase, weren't you a little bit racist there, and so on and so on and so on. Another thing that I find also here strange, it's an observation. I would like you to show me if I'm wrong. But the difference here between the domain of sexuality and the domain of race relations. How? In the case of Laurence Olivier, or playing a black guy, or generally racial relations, you have to stick to your identity. Like, it's false for a white guy, it's cultural appropriation or racism, blah, blah, to play a black guy. Here, they prefer that you are only a black guy, can be properly a black guy, and so on and so on. Mm-hmm. But isn't it, or do I have a wrong observation here, that in the domain of in the domain of sexuality, fluidity and adopting different positions is praised all the time? What would be the correlative of a white guy playing a black guy? I don't know, a straight guy dressing up as a woman and so on. All this constant sliding and changing identities, I don't get it, but there they are. It's a deep difference. There in the domain of sexuality, fluidity of every position is supported to the end, and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there was a cancellation of a philosopher in the United States. I think her name was Tavel. She had written for a feminist journal about how if we were to support the trans rights movement, we should also support the trans racial rights movement.
What happened to her? It's a perfect example.
Yeah, so people said that her article was an act of violence against the trans community and or the of people of color, depending on which group was speaking. But they called for her piece to be removed, and the public publishers of the piece issued a public apology for having published it. But it was, in fact, only a kind of boring philosophical essay where the logic of the defense of transgender rights was examined and compared to a defense of transracial rights, and found that, like in a kind of analytic philosophy kind of way, that, you know, to be consistent, you had to hold both positions as equally valuable, and the conclusion was we should support people in their struggle in their transgender identity, and we should support people in their struggle for their transracial identity. That was her conclusion. But that was deemed to be an attack on transgender people and on people of color by people who read it.
Can I tell you another thing which confirms perfectly what you said and implies another quite nice insight?
By the way, just to talk about that case at all is an act of hate, probably in some people's imaginations, because we are supposed to have forgotten that ever happened.
Now you said something so important. Mm-hmm. That's the problem for me with political correctness. When you approach the really touchy points, you cannot even openly discuss them. You have to do what Hegel uses this term. It's a beautiful German word, ungeschehen machen, to undo it, to treat it as if it didn't happen. The point is, of course, that this doesn't work because, again, this is another example of what I call prohibition of the prohibition itself.
Indigenous faculty, students, supporters, and allies walking with purpose. The protesters are calling on universities to hold transparent investigations into any faculty or staff members who are suspected of falsely claiming they are Indigenous. This comes on the heels of CBC's investigation that found U of S health researcher Carrie Bourassa's ancestors all came from Europe, and found no link to Indigenous ancestry, despite Bourassa's many claims over the past 20 years.
Using a false identity to then stand up and speak for Indigenous women, to take our voice, it's theft. You don't have a right to speak for our experiences based on fabrications.
To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those who spiritually reside, and a way of honoring Indigenous people who have been living and working on the land.
You see, I'm a big fan of land acknowledgements, but this is not a land acknowledgement. This is a reading of a piece of paper. This is a procedural, bureaucratic, even if she's actually Indigenous, it doesn't matter. Look, if you want to do a land acknowledgement, really do a land acknowledgement. Don't read a piece of paper. Talk from the heart. Speak from the heart. Say something original. Stop repeating idioms. This is not a land acknowledgement. This is the opposite of a land acknowledgement. And I don't care if you're indigenous or not. I don't care who you are. Acknowledge the land. This is maddening. Look at some critiques of, there are critiques of land acknowledgements, but people don't look at the critiques. And the critiques come from educated indigenous people. Listen to them. It's maddening, this bullshit, especially when you're about to introduce a sociopath.
It is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought you to reside on the land and to seek and understand your places in that history. Therefore, we acknowledge that Durham and Duke University gathers on land that has long served as the site of meeting and exchange among numerous indigenous peoples, historically.
Wait, I just realized I should use the headphones.
Talbot people. It is also important to recognize the 8 tribes that currently reside in North Carolina today. These include the Coharie, the Lumbee, the Mahiran, the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi, the Halawasaponi, the Wakamasuan, the Saponi, and the Eastern Band of Cherokee. We honor and respect the diverse indigenous peoples connected to this territory on which we have gathered. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darren. Dr. Carrie
Thank
Bourassa
you,
is Scientist Director of the Canadian Institutes of Health Research Institute of Indigenous Peoples Health. She is a professor of community health and epidemiology in the College of Medicine at the University of Saskatchewan. She is an adjunct professor in the faculties of education and kinesiology and health studies at the University of Regina, and is the nominated principal investigator for the
Regina
Innovation CFI funded.
Oh yes, look at all these fundings and grants that this lady is getting.
Morningstar
This
Large,
sociopath.
established in 2010, as well as for the recently CFI funded Cultural Safety Evaluation Training and Research Lab that will be built by the summer of 2021, hosted at the University of Saskatchewan.
Oh,
Dr. Bourassa
wonderful.
has nearly 20 years experience as a professor in the field of Indigenous health studies across 4
20 years of experience bullshitting her way through. Oh my God.
different universities. Through her role as Scientific Director of Canadian Institutes of Health Research Institute of Indigenous Peoples Health, she leads the advancements of a national health research agenda to improve and promote the health of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in Canada. Dr. Bourassa has been recently appointed in 2020 as the Indigenous...
You know what would be funny if she actually, cared and she actually did do a lot of things? Maybe she did promote vaccines or something.
Lead for the COVID-19 Immunity Task Force and the Indigenous lead for the Rapid Response Team, Saskatchewan Health Authority. Dr. Bourassa is Métis and belongs to the Rail Métis Council of Regina Incorporated. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Dr. Bourassa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, so I'm really honored to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Okay, here we go. Here we go for the nice, thick, sociopathic explanation of land acknowledgement and how she's going to be repeating the same idiomatic tropes without any authenticity, without any originality, lying through her teeth.
We also have land acknowledgements where I'm from. I'm originally from Treaty 4 territory, which is in the southern part of Saskatchewan. It's just due north of North Dakota. I originally grew up with my grandfather. He raised me. I was born to teen parents. So I want to acknowledge the land which we are facilitating in this webinar is Treaty 6 territory, where I currently live at the University of Saskatchewan, and it's traditional territory of the Cree, Dene, Nakota, Saulteaux, and homeland of the Métis Nation. And I myself am Anishinaabe Métis.
Oh yeah.
If you could flip the slide. So I don't want to spend too much time. Emily did a great job.
Look at her. She just... Oh my God. How can you lie like this? How can you dress up and you call yourself the Morning Star Lodge? Isn't the Morning Star like a Jewish thing? Anyway.
Facing me, and I, it's not really not in my nature to talk about myself. I did want to say that the Morning Star...
Not in my nature to talk about myself. Leave your ego at the door.
Our lodge in Regina was the name that we named it. It wasn't us, actually. It was blessed in ceremony. And everything that we do at the lab, we have 15 staff.
Oh, okay. She just explained. So it was a ceremony that made it a Morning Star ceremony, not some Abrahamic tradition.
Most of them are First Nation, Métis, or Inuit. Some are community members. Some are community researchers, for example, all the way up to postdocs. And we have a philosophy that when we sit in a circle, all of us have gifts to offer. And so we make it very clear that whether you are a PhD, whether you are an undergrad, whether you have a grade 9 education, we all have something to offer. So we remind everybody that we take our egos and check them at the door when they come in.
Isn't that funny? She just repeated the same idiom. The idioms. You see how powerful idioms are? You see how unthinking idioms are? You see how when you do a land acknowledgement without actually acknowledging the land, it's possible to do that?
how we serve Indigenous communities, not only in Saskatchewan but across Canada. That's the philosophy that we have. And for me, I never ever imagined in a million years that I would become a professor, let alone, I would have been excited to graduate high school, which I was the first to do that in my family.
Fucking racist piece of shit. This racist piece of shit. Oh, I was the first to graduate from high school. Oh my goodness.
So it is quite an honor to be here and share some of the work that we do at Morningstar Lodge and at the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. If you could flip it, Emily. This is our team. We have a great team. As I said, some are Indigenous.
A team filled with affirmative action ladies here, all who have grants, who work under this sociopath. This sociopath is the gatekeeper. They've made a sociopath into a gatekeeper of all of this identity bullshit. Somebody's got to call this out. I guess it's going to be me. I guess I'm the only one that doesn't give a fuck about my social capital. You see, again, I've said this before. Hannah Arendt says, in the public sphere, whose voice is worth listening to in a world where there's so much noise, where everybody, all of these different religions are saying something. There's only one person's voice that's worth listening to, and those are the people who are willing to put their life on the line. That's why I think voting shouldn't be some willy-nilly thing. Voting should be connected to your ability to put your life on the line for your society. That's what the patriarchy was always about, actually. The patriarchy was that not just men have a vote, but men who are willing to risk their lives to defend the community have a vote. That's way different. Okay? Again, I'm not defending the patriarchy. I'm speaking from a devil's advocate position. Ironically here, the intersectional psychologists have deemed the devil's advocate position as a form of toxic masculinity. Search devil's advocate, toxic masculinity. It's insane who these people are and how they have affirmative action committees and how they control the psychology and the judicial system and how they make these sociopaths into positions of leadership. It's not just Carrie Bourassa. It's endemic. Okay? This Carrie Bourassa, who's a Ukrainian or whatever.
Or not. Many are working in community. We have many community partnerships, and we develop partnership agreements. And we are not the kind of team that goes out searching for partnerships. Communities come to us, and we serve them. So what are their needs? What are the kinds of research projects that are important to them? And
again, she's repeating these idioms. These idioms are like, we need to listen to all these people when she's not even listening.
And we engage them, and we work to ensure that the research is beneficial for them, that we build capacity, and whatever it is that they ask us to do, that is our job to do that. So
again, repeating idioms, building capacity.
Carrie Bourassa, for example, she's a postdoc. She worked in Australia for many, many years. She is a settler, but she's been adopted into two Australian Indigenous communities. Okay,
a settler that's been adopted. Look at this insanity. Do you realize this is Duke University? Why doesn't anybody trust Duke University? Why don't people trust the humanities anymore? Why don't people trust social science anymore? Why have men as gender have dropped out from this bullshit? This is the reason why. Okay? Nobody respects affirmative action. Okay? As a minority person myself or whatever, I don't want to play the race card, but I don't respect anybody who plays the race card for the sake of playing the race card in all contexts. It's so disingenuous. It's so disgusting.
Jeanette Star-Blanket, she's Cree. She's finishing her doctoral degree in about a month. We're going to be doing a feast and celebration. Sadie Anderson is First Nations as well. She is our research manager, and we could not do any work without her. Miranda Kiwatin also is just finished her social work degree, and she's First Nations from southern Saskatchewan. We have Michaela Hagel and Jen Billen, both are settlers, but again have really learned and understood and know what it is to be an ally, and they have done excellent work. Marlon McGarrett and
they know how to be an ally. They know how to be an ally. I taught them how to be an ally. Me, the sociopath. Look at how she repeats these idioms. I can't keep stressing that. Be aware of these idioms, people. Speak originally. Stop repeating the party line.
And we have a few others that are just joining our team that we weren't able to add. So we have about 15 full and part-time folks on our team at any given time. And now we're expanding into the cultural safety evaluation training and research lab as well.
This person is in charge of the ultimate safe space, which is the cultural safety and evaluation lab. They call it a lab because they have to have this veil of scientism. It's disgusting. All of these people are disgusting. I don't care if you're an Indigenous person. This whole process is disgusting. People don't realize this, that affirmative action is racist.
Do you want to flip the slide, Emily? So I just wanted to sort of share what I'm hoping I'll be able to talk about. Basically, healthcare and cultural safety, the impacts of colonization. We know that COVID-19 has really magnified the colonial influences of racism, oppression, the historical legacies, the government policies that are continuing on. I mean, this never ended. And the health inequities and intergenerational.
It definitely didn't end. You're continuing it, you.
People's experiences and the community-driven model that we've been really blessed to develop at the direction of Indigenous communities, and that is the protecting our home fire strategy as a driver for self-determination. So it sort of starts out, I guess, with maybe a little bit of context, and then how do we address this? If you want to flip this slide, Emily. So cultural safety. I'm sure that many of you have heard this this term. And sometimes
look at how she cites herself.
Cultural safety is about culture. I hear that a lot, and that's not what it's about at all. Cultural safety is actually about addressing systemic racism, bias, discrimination, stigma, and in particularly about the structural issues.
Nothing original is being said here. Repeating. I'm gonna look at that paper and I'm gonna revel in it soon. Okay, you're gonna see.
In healthcare, but in all of the systems that we live, work, and play in. So we think about justice, education, in all of the systems that we work and live in. There are structural issues. There's structural racism, discrimination, and so it is really difficult to address those issues because they have been ingrained in our systems. In Canada, for example,
you are part of that ingrainment. And
so in other countries,
you sociopath.
It could be even longer. And so it is important to understand how we can at least attempt to start to address these issues. And in order to address them, we have to face what I say is the truth. In Canada, we have something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So in that case, many people want to jump to what they see as being a little bit easier, and that is reconciliation. Let's jump to reconciliation, right? Let's talk about some of the easier things. Because in facing the truth, you have to really start to analyze yourself. You have to do some deep thinking. You have to start looking at power imbalances. You have to start thinking about white privilege, right?
You have to start thinking of whether I should be speaking on behalf of Indigenous people when I'm not fucking Indigenous.
You have to start thinking about your own privileges and how are you complicit in discrimination and racism.
Yeah. Complicity is really, really important. Oh my lord, I can't believe these people are in charge of how many grants this lady has gotten, how much the Canadian government supports these colonizers. These are colonizers. These are the worst colonizers.
And what are you going to do about it? And if you don't have the truth, if you haven't really dug deep and start thinking about historic trauma, colonization, residential schools, 60s scoop, and how all of those things have compounded and impacted in generations of Indigenous people, then you're never going to get to reconciliation. And we're never going to be able to address these power imbalances. So cultural safety, helps us to understand these things, helps us to have that lens. And I want to say that
cultural safety.
When we talk about history, it's not about pointing fingers at allies and non-Indigenous people. It is understanding that context so that we can get to those solutions, so that we can get to reconciliation. Because I can tell you one thing.
Nothing is new. Nothing is new.
Reconciliation is not one of them for me. It's not my job to reconcile. It is the job of non-Indigenous people.
This is the moralization of the commodification of emotional labor. Is the utmost form of colonialism right here. It's not my job. It's all of our jobs. This is the fucking worst kind of Roxanne Gay feminism that I keep critiquing. This commodification of emotional labor. No, I'm so sorry. White people have to decolonize too. We all have to decolonize. And that requires hard work on all of our behalf. That means we all have to do some form of work here. You cannot point fingers at other people to do the work. She just said don't point fingers. But she just said it's not my job. You, in fact, not only is it your job, Carrie Bourassa, because you're the sociopath liar here, in fact, you have the biggest job now.
To think about reconciliation. And then come back and meld truth with reconciliation and say, I get it. How can we come together now? How do we build?
So there's also huge critiques of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And you can look at some of my citations in my main paper, Carrying Over the Burdens of Trace, which is my paper. I've gotten a couple citations so far, hopefully. That'll grow, okay.
With our partnership, how do we rebuild our relationships? But it is not my job to initiate that.
Fuck you. Fuck you.
So cultural safety helps all of us to look inward. Because I'm not free of bias. Of course I have bias.
You're definitely not free of bias.
The work that I do. I have to reflect. I have to think about what I do as a researcher. That critical reflection is important. And it requires us to think about authority and privilege. I have privilege. I absolutely have privilege. I did not when I was growing up. I was poor, came from a very poor family. There was a lot of addictions, a lot of violence. I still carry a lot of that with me, even though I
fucking racist.
What does that mean? How do you heal? How do you forgive? How do you get there? And just when you think you do, I have a 21-year-old.
I just want to say that this form of racism is 1,000 times worse than the Confederates with the flag chasing black people around. This form of racism is much worse.
10-year-old, you realize, gosh, I've passed some of that on to them. And that's probably going to be passed on to my grandchildren. And then you have the guilt and compounded guilt, because that trauma is going to be with us. Right? My kuka, my grandmother, who's a pipe carrier, she said, you can't ever think that you're just healed. It's a lifelong journey. You can't carry that guilt. Right? So understanding now that I realize, I was the first to go to high school, I was the first to go to university, and that almost seemed like a burden to me. And now I realize I have privilege, and I have to do good things with that privilege. But also knowing that I'm still going to experience racism. When I go to the hospital, I have lupus. When I go to the hospital, what happens when I go into the hospital? I experience racism. So there's class privilege, and then there's still racism. So trying to explain through my story, right, how COVID-19 can exacerbate things. We're going to talk about this. How can we know these things happen in our communities? How does COVID-19 exacerbate this, and how can cultural safety address it? So understanding these things and understanding how they get compounded is
Duke University here.
We also need to understand that researchers have to think about the past and bring it forward to the future. Because in the past, Indigenous communities had experimentation done on them. They had their DNA taken from them and never saw it again. And so now in COVID-19, what's happening? Well, I'm leading a seroprevalence study. There's some communities going, whoa, we don't want you to take our blood. We don't want to be swabbed. What are you going to do with that? What does it require? Trust. Developing those relationships. Ensuring that the communities are empowered. Ensuring that the communities are leading the research. Not me.
Trust.
Right? The researchers should not be leading it. The researchers are there to support Indigenous communities to lead the research. It is so important to understand that we have to flip the script. Indigenous communities now are the ones that should be leading. Right? We have to establish that trust.
Look at her, repeating these idioms.
Practicing cultural safety really is ensuring that protection of our home fires, if you will. And what we found, so practicing cultural safety really is ensuring that protection of our home fires, if you will. And what we found as soon as COVID-19 hit in March in Canada, in our territory, was that, we asked communities, how can we help? What can we do? And the first thing that they were saying is, we need appropriate information. We don't know what's good information, what's bad. There's all kinds of information at that time. I'm sure all of you were seeing this on Twitter and Facebook, and
Yeah, Carrie, we need appropriate information, Carrie.
And so we realized that we had to share information that was culturally safe, and that wasn't just a lot of verbiage. So this is why we decided that we are very visual people, and that yes, handouts are good, but they have to be something that can be related to Indigenous communities, and it have to be in their own languages. And so I'm going to share some of the knowledge translation tools that we developed at the direction of the communities that we served. If you want to flip it, Emily. I know I better hurry up because I tend to end up going off on a tangent and talking about things that I probably shouldn't talk about, unless I know I have more time.
Yeah, she's really good at repeating idioms, so she could end up anywhere because, you know, we need appropriate information, Carrie. You fucking lying sociopath, intersectional colonizer. You.
When researchers say, oh, we can scale up this practice, I sort of cringe because scale up is not a word that we like to use. You can't scale up programs. You might be able to take the bare bones of the model, and maybe it can be adapted by other communities, but these are programs that have to be tailored to the communities themselves. And I've worked with communities where they can be 15 miles down the road and be completely different, the language completely different. I'm sure many of you can relate to this, and that means that you have to tailor the services to the communities themselves. And
man, the way she is such an expert at repeating these idioms, you need particular solutions. Look, this is why I prefer the Malcolm X thing. We are already colonized. We're already all colonized. This is why we need to drop the whole intersectional nonsense. We are already colonized. There's already universality. We all only have one religion. There's only the religion of money. That brings us all together. Okay? Osama bin Laden, in Yuval Harari's book, hates the United States, but still accepts an American dollar.
Just like research, they have to be the ones.
The Malcolm X. Why is he called Malcolm X? The X in Malcolm X is very revolutionary. Okay?
Driving it. And the healthcare providers, there's obviously room and need for allied researchers and allied clinicians, but they need to understand, that they're there at the in service to community, right? I think sometimes medical professionals and researchers sort of feel like they're the experts, and so they have all the answers. But in truth,
people lie to themselves so much that these lies become so ingrained. It becomes part of their whole identity of themselves. It's so sad to actually see this.
The communities are the ones that live it every single day. They not only know what the problems are, they also have the solutions, and we need to listen to them way more than we normally do. And we have to blend Western medicine with traditional medicine. You can see the picture here. That's a full moon ceremony. Traditional medicine and traditional ways of knowing are a priority when it comes to thinking about addressing healthcare,
full moon ceremonies are found in Europe. They're pretty old. You can find moon ceremonies and sun ceremonies throughout the world. Okay? And those are ways of bringing us together. Particularity doesn't exist anymore, guys. We've already been colonized. And we know we've been colonized because we have people like Carrie Bourassa who, oh my goodness, who repeat these idioms. It's just so insane. This is the most insane news I've gotten. I can't get over it.
Grief, mental health, and physical health.
Look at her. Look at her repeat pop psychology.
Because that spiritual aspect often gets left out, but it's vitally important for Indigenous people. So when healthcare providers,
I bet you this person does believe in a lot of the spiritual bullshit that she's co-opted, because, and I don't mean the spirituality is bullshit. I mean, she turns it into bullshit through her co-option. And that's what I'm talking about with a lot of these witch ceremonies and a lot of these people who try to make money off of tarot cards. All of these people are so deluded. They're worse than religious people. Religious people who go to church, they have a systematic way of dealing, and they have a communion. They have a whole systematic delusion. This delusion is non-systematic. It's pure schizophrenia.
engage with clients, it can be an opportunity to become more Indigenous client focused when healthcare providers are encouraged to include family members and elders and communities. Dear elders that I worked with for many, many years on end of life and palliative care issues, and he was dying. And the nurse that was looking after him at home wouldn't let him take his tea. He had pancreatic cancer, and he had to have it through his a tube in his stomach. And he called me near the end of his time, and he said, "Can you please come? I need your help." I didn't know what it was about, and I got there, and he was in the back of his house, and he always liked to joke. And he said, "I need your expertise," and it was to help him give him tea through his feeding tube. And he was laughing and joking with me, and he said, "I know that I'm not supposed to have it," but he goes, "I know I'm dying," and he needed that, and it was something that I was able to help him with. But that is respecting, his wishes. That is respecting, his last wishes, and whether or not it is going to really help him, or even if it is something that may
really help him,
medical perspective harm him. In his perspective, it was going to help him to pass on in a good way, and that is his right. And I think this is something that has to be addressed. That is about cultural safety. If you want to flip the slide, Emily.
So she basically just, oh my goodness. I mean, I agree with the right to die stuff, but okay, so let's read the slide. Impacts of colonization on Indigenous people's health. Systemic racism, oppression, white fragility. Again, these fucking stupid fucking idioms that everybody repeats.
So in terms of impact of colonization,
let's see if she says something
about this. We're talking here about systemic racism and oppression, white fragility, government policies, and how that affects and is compounded when it comes to the myriad of health issues that Indigenous peoples face. And I don't think I've seen Indigenous health issues improve in the 20 years that I've been working in this field. And so, how do we?
Yeah, because you're in this fucking field.
Close that gap. How are we really going to start to address? I don't have a magic bullet or
fucking
anything like that,
maddening.
but I believe that we will start to address this when we start to see self-determination and self-government. That's what I believe. If you want to flip the page, Emily. Part of it, again, and I won't spend a lot of time, I did have started to talk about this, but I think, again, really understanding some of the root causes is intergenerational trauma is when earlier forms of oppression and injustice are built by the systems, which we've spoken about. Then there's ongoing trauma. And in Canada, Canadians tend to think that, okay, that's been in the past, there's no, we're done with it.
You're the ongoing trauma.
Okay, so you have intergenerational trauma and historic trauma. And at the same time, we still have an Indian Act that continues with the trauma. And there's that intersectionality between the historic trauma and intergenerational trauma. And the
She used it. She used the term I hate.
How are we addressing that intersectionality? And how do we even think about that when we have not?
Is intersectionality a term that originates in Indigenous communities? No, it doesn't. It originates in Appalachia from Bell Hooks and her university education. It originates in the university. And universities are the primary source of colonialism throughout history, the history of anthropology. Look at my Ritual Traces series.
Addressed our past. So there's that. And then, there is a genetic imprint. And that genetic imprint is passed down to our ancestors in terms of, epigenetics. There's certainly evidence there. But there's also, I think, on the flip side, our ancestors have also passed down incredible resilience and strength. So I also want to make that point. There's also, I think, a point to be made around that we've had, denigration and destruction of Indigenous ceremonial responsibilities, and we've lost a lot of our history of our ceremonies. Some ceremonies are lost forever. Some have had to be pieced back together. And the ceremony in our communities, as many of you will well know, are just, they're priceless.
They're mostly lost. They're mostly lost, right? Let's deal with the truth, like you said, truth and reconciliation. Most of these rituals are lost through time. That's the depth of colonialism. The deep understanding of colonialism is that you're colonized. That's the deepest understanding, that you are colonized. Okay? In fact, I think that indigenous people here have less work of decolonization to do than white people. White people have much more work of decolonization to do. Indigenous people still have those pieces, those fragments. White people have lost everything. White people were the first to colonize themselves. And I'm saying this as a person, as a Babylonian. Okay, I'm not Babylonian, but I'm from Gilan. But, you know, as a Babylonian, I understand that I have to dig deep through Islam, through the Abrahamic traditions, and get through even the Zoroastrian religions. Okay, if I'm decolonizing as a person from Gilan, I have to get through all of these religious barriers, all of these, not just the, you know, colonization of Russia and Britain, but also through even what I perceive to be as, many perceive to be as the original, which is the Zoroastrian. Through that, and, you know, I have Greek roots, so what decolonization there means is going even past Plato and Socrates, going past the ancients into the pre-Socratics. You see, Plato and Socrates also talk about the ancients, their own ancients. Who are they? Okay, this process of Heideggerian uncovering is important. And Heidegger was a Nazi.
Central to our health and well-being. And then, you know, transmission of trauma is extremely complex, and it has to be understood, you know, really across generations, of course, and really, again, trying to just break that cycle, as I had spoken earlier. If you want to flip the slide. So in terms of, you know, a burden of health, Indigenous peoples obviously carry an inordinate burden of health, and in Canada, certainly suffer the worst health of any group in Canada, full stop. In Canada, we experience the poorest living conditions. We have inequitable access to education and employment. Geographically, lack access to healthcare and health services, and that doesn't include the systemic racism. I think that's even worse. Most Indigenous people in Canada do not want to go to a hospital because they experience racism and stigma and bias, and, you know, all of it. I was just speaking with a number of my colleagues who there's been a trend in Canada now where people are betting on how drunk certain Indigenous people will be when they come into the ER. You know, it's I don't think I got too much left going on here. So, and then, you know, again, self-determination.
Never had anything going on.
Such a priority in terms of health and wellness. You know, this is really about positive health outcomes for individuals. It's about autonomy, making your own decisions.
You know, I'm thinking about a couple other big cases on the left. One is Foucault and his sexual deviance when it comes to children, that's a big one, because Foucault, there's a lot of citational power with his work. The next one, and, you know, you can't cancel him. The second one is Heidegger and how he's a Nazi, which is a terrible thing because a lot of, again, citational resources require, oh my God, look at all these people that she has power over, this Carrie Bourassa. Look at all of these people. Next one is the famous paper that was given in with all of the bullshit rhetoric that was passed in peer review when it was just talking about nothing. There's a bunch of these things that the woke people really need to pay attention to, because it's destroying the actual wokeness that we should be having. It's destroying all of that. All right, let's keep going.
Or clinician provider or researcher, if that's the case. You see on the left side, we undertake ceremony, and we see ceremony as also a training aspect as well. If we're going to train in methodology, then we also see that spirituality is another key aspect in terms of quote training.
She never talked about white privilege and systemic racism, and she didn't really talk about it. She gave like a couple examples, but I don't think she actually knows anything about these topics. I'm going to be looking at a couple more of her lectures and going through her paper too. But she's just repeating idioms. She's not adding anything new. What was the new thing she added here? So she just read somebody else's idioms. I think this woman is delusional. I think she believes in her bullshit. She just keeps repeating these idioms too. It's not even... She doesn't give any...
And we have to have a preparedness for future pandemics and crises. This isn't...
We collective breaths together and really hear the powerful words of the presentation.
Okay, well, I actually like this. This lady is like this white woman is way more authentic. That's perfect. That's actually, honestly, that was the best part of the whole fucking thing. Oy.
I can start us off with a question that I have.
A few short breaths. Really? That was the best part.
And I wonder if you're able to share some of what you learned about what matters most to people and to the
Excuse me, I have to come up with some bullshit really quickly. She's a professional, so let's see.
Is that community members, they don't want to experience racism. They want to be treated in a safe manner, in a dignified manner. There is so much fear of stigma and discrimination and racism, and I think that
back to the idioms.
This is why I talk so much about what cultural safety means and how do we really implement this and how do we start to really tackle this?
How do we do it? How? Oh yeah.
I've said this in a couple of presentations.
I've repeated the same idioms in the cultural. It has to stop.
And in fact, I'm on the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada, even though I'm not a medical doctor. And we finally were able to.
I'm not a medical doctor.
Courses for medical students, and so. But I love the idea of
how this sociopath worked her way, snaked her way into these conferences, into these. So every association here is complicit, working with this lady. Every association.
Northern BC, and she's got an institute which is
they just recently had a conversation with Jean Chrétien.
Now there's the recovery of the unmarked graves at the residential institutions. As you know, I know that you were involved in the white paper. This is a big part of your life. A lot of folks say you and Pierre Trudeau should have shut down the residential school system then. Instead, what's your view of it now? And do you take any responsibility for that?
They were there since a long time. And, when the last one was closed by me when I was Prime Minister. We had to manage the problem at that time. Education was a very important thing for natives. When I became the minister, there was only a dozen, I think, Indian people graduating from university. Thousands and thousands are graduating every year now. Education is the key. And in those days, in the isolated area, that was the system they had.
But they don't regard that as education. They regard it as cultural genocide.
No, but I'm telling you what is the situation.
Last question on this. Justin Trudeau has apologized, as you know, for the situation.
But I'm not here to talk about the...
So, he deflects responsibility, but at least he gives a much more authentic answer than this Bourassa.
But really the work that's happening in many Native American communities, and there's a lot of synergy there that's happening now. And then a lot of work...
Synergy. Another one of these idiomatic words. Neoliberal idiomatic words.
Yeah, so I think actually it would be good if we, to me it would be great because we seem to have all these connections, but if we could make them more formal, I think that would be helpful. We do have, for example, the CRAC. I'm trying to make that a national body, and so I wonder if there's interest if we could think about creating a larger body so that we could stay more connected and try to address this on a more formal level. I certainly would be interested in thinking about that if there's appetite for it.
Look at this sociopath. She's trying to formalize her bullshit.
Contrast how you see these issues approached in Canada with the US.
I think they're very similar. I think Canada, the U.S., Australia, New Zealand are all very, very similar. And even I was in Brazil 2 years ago before the pandemic and spoke with several Indigenous communities there. And even in Brazil, there's a lot of similarities in some of the kids' health.
This girl has got a chance to travel the world for the last 20 years, bullshitting to everybody.
Network sort of resonates of similarities. Even if you just think about Canada and the U.S., there's a lot of similarities.
Thank you. We have a question from a student asking if you could share a bit more about your personal life journey. How did you end up becoming a professor when you didn't even know if you graduate high school? What motivated you?
Wonderful question.
So yeah, sometimes I get a little emotional about it. But I'm happy.
Here we go. Emotional.
It was my grandfather. He only had grade 3, and he was my motivation. Yeah, and when he passed, I just knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let him down. When I was young, he used to say to me,
crocodile tears.
Lawyer, and I was really little, and I didn't know what a lawyer was, and I didn't want to ask him, so I just kept thinking, okay, that sounds cool. So doctor or lawyer, and I did the LSAT and I did okay, but I just knew I just didn't want to be a lawyer, and so I kept on, and I did not think I was smart enough to become a medical doctor, and so I just sort of kept going on, and doors open. And
look at how she's crying.
I had a master's degree.
These crocodile tears are virtue signaling. Crocodile tears exist throughout our society. Now, we've normalized this.
I was very young, manager of employment equity at the University of Regina, and one of the VPs came down. I had been doing a lot of teaching, just on contract, and I was doing a lot of curriculum development on cultural sensitivity at the time it was called. And the VP, I guess, came in and watched a session or two, and she came to me and she said, we think that you're sort of not meeting your calling, and I thought I was going to get fired. And I said, I'm sorry, I'll do better. And she said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. You need to go do your PhD. And I said, no, I just had TV. I just had a daughter. Like, I don't want to do that. And lo and behold, about 2 weeks later, I got a call from First Nations University, who was a sort of affiliate, and they said, we really want you to come and interview for this job.
You're really good at bullshitting. You're really good at repeating the party line. You should come and do your PhD.
Creator's not going to hit you upside the head too many more times before he decides not to do it anymore. So I took the interview and I got the job, and I had to do my PhD at the same time.
So you can see it's a systemic issue. She was pushed into doing this crap. She was pushed into lying more. It was a little lie that kept getting bigger and bigger because they need tokens.
A tenured track position. It took me 7 years, but I just, it was hard. But then I just fell in love with the serving community.
I just fell in love with my lies. I fell in love with the increasing amount of bullshit that I had to do oh my goodness.
She was not Indigenous.
She didn't want to be in the spotlight.
Husband was the president of First Nations University, and he was actually Choctaw from the U.S. And just, I'm telling you, like, every door opened that could ever possibly be opened that I never thought in a million years would happen.
Yeah, because affirmative action.
And I'm the worst person to ever go to a career fair because when people ask, how did your career path go? I did.
Yeah, it's because I have to come up with a fucking stable lie, and I don't know how to do it.
I still don't have a plan, things.
I don't have a plan. I was pushed into bullshitting, and now I have to keep bullshitting.
Things just happen, and
things just happened. Yeah. So now I have to. And this is the best interview question so far.
My advice to students are always that if you love your job, it's not a job. It's your calling, and it's what you're supposed to do.
Another fucking idiom. This lady is just a bunch of idioms. She's a bunch of empty idioms. And because she's a bunch of empty idioms, they rose her up the ranks.
And you do your best and you do good things for your people, and that's it,
That's it. So she's not the only psychopath. She's not the only sociopath who finds herself in these positions. You see, when we don't have a devil's advocate, when we have no devil's advocate, when we have no genuine critique, we make the people who rise the ranks are these sociopaths. And then these sociopaths start, through affirmative action, bring in more sociopaths. This is not the only person. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
I think, again, not scaled up, but something that you can look at and say, this could be done. This could be done. You could do it in a way that meets other needs.
Every person who's ever benefited from affirmative action questions it. Every person who hasn't yet, gotten a position, any person who's an actual minority is always hesitant of playing the race card.
What types of actions can we take, or what types of policy can we advocate for to support Indigenous health?
I think one thing that's sort of starting, and we're starting to do this work now, is really like anti-racism. It has to be, like, cultural safety is important, but I think really like looking at anti-racism is very important, and looking at, if you want to call it,
prescribed intersectionality. We really need to double down on the bullshitting.
And that's one thing that I want the new lab to look at, is that we don't know if it's working or not. We don't really know if the training works or not. And that training and that evaluation has to happen.
You know why we don't know? Okay, I'm going to give you an example of someone who is actually dealing with these problems. Someone who's actually thinking about those problems, and she's from Democracy Now!
About this resurgence and greater attention now to anti-racism. It's occurring in corporate America. It's occurring in university campuses. Specifically, a lot of university administrators and corporate leaders are increasingly talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They even have a new acronym that they rolls off their lips, DEI. And there's all kinds of new research projects, foundation funds, plans to diversify staffs. And yet most of these institutions continue to pursue exploitative connections to the mass of Black and brown communities around them. What, in your view, are the pitfalls of this current type of wokeness that we have to be vigilant against?
So this lady, she is picking and choosing here. Okay, and look at how she responds. She thinks that everybody on the right, whether they're an anti-vaxxer, they're also a flat earther, they're also a QAnon conspiracy theorist. She does so much essentialization. And look how she responds.
Okay, so if you follow me on Twitter at all, you know that I would never use the word wokeness. I think it is meaningless, and I think we should never be taking the language of conservative propagandists, which is what this wokeism is coming from.
No, it's not. It's not.
What I'll say is one thing that I do have in common with conservatives on this is I do think that DEI is generally not great, not for the reasons that they say. I just think it tends to be extremely superficial, that we don't actually see much transformation, that all of these corporations that last year with Black Lives Matter, all of these institutions, including Congress, who were saying that this was going to be a transformative moment, they did a lot of performance. So, DEI trainings and turning your square on Instagram Black, that's performance. If we look a year out, more than a year out, what types of structural change did we see at any of these institutions? And the answer is almost none.
And the funny thing about performance here is that performance is not emotional labor. Right. I see that so much conversation regarding emotional labor is about, I have to pretend to be happy. Hey, that's not emotional labor, lady. Okay, so this is a really good
right now,
interview.
Talk about the significance of this civil suit, of this, the jury finding these men guilty, and what $26 million means.
Sure. So the lawyers for the plaintiff said that this judgment, this amount of money, really sends a message to other people who might think that they want to show up and commit violent acts in cities, that they can't get away with it, that there won't be, that they won't get off scot-free, that there will be some repercussions. And so $26 million, it's a lot of money, but there's a big question about, will these defendants be able to pay it? Chris Cantwell, James Fields are already incarcerated. And so they're not earning a ton of money. Many of the other defendants are already destitute from all of the pre-investigation leading into this trial. The fact that they are not able to work, that they're now publicly known as white supremacists and neo-Nazis who are unemployable in a lot of industries and institutions, right? And so I think there is just this big outstanding question of how much money will they actually be able to come up with, and what strategies do they have to be able to extract money from these folks, liens on houses, garnishing wages, things like that. But I think the bigger picture here is that, they came into Charlottesville with the intention to create and start a race war, and that the criminal justice system hasn't found any liability. But in a civil system, we say, you cannot get away with this.
And in terms of the organizations that these men belong to, many of them are either going to declare bankruptcy and then reorganize under other names, or what's your sense of what's happened to the organizations?
Again, Juan Gonzalez here asking the real questions.
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And I think it's the question that we're all, grappling with or dealing with, to say, is bankrupting these organizations, is bankrupting these individuals enough to actually stop the growing threat of the rising threat of white supremacy and Nazism in the United States? We know that there are a number of young men who feel disaffected and displaced, and they're gathering every day in chat rooms to share ideas, to commiserate, to strategize. And so there's a high likelihood that the organizations that exist now become defunct. They turn over whatever assets they might have on hand, and then new organizations are started, and new people come together in chat rooms to plan for this kind of thing. And so I think it's just the open question of, we don't yet know. And I think it's important to point out that this was the strategy used to try to take down the Ku Klux Klan, in the Jim Crow era and through the civil rights movement, right? And so there was some effectiveness there. But again, looking back in time and sort of moving forward, we see that one hateful group, one white supremacist group, just morphed into new factions and new iterations of the same ideology. And so is bankrupting them actually truly enough to stamp out hate? I don't think so. I think there are many people who study hate and extremism who know just how extraordinary the threat is, and that financial damages just simply won't be enough to do that.
They study them within their own citational polarized echo chamber. They're only allowed to create papers that agree with the popular narrative. If you don't agree with the party line, that's the main thing that's fueling all this. It's the moralization of the commodification of emotional labor. That's the main thing that's fueling all of this. If people don't come together, if people say it's too much work to do the work of reconciliation. So I'm going to stop it there. This is a really good conversation. You should definitely check it out. It's from November 24th of Democracy Now! The problem with Democracy Now! Is that they are also, half of what they do is part of this thing that contributes, right? This moralization of commodification of emotional labor. It's the Ayn Randian left, the neoliberal left, that is feeding the fascism. And the fascism on the right is more powerful than neoliberalism on the right now, which is crazy. That's why people are switching over. Okay, on the right. They're going towards the right. Okay, let's go back to our sociopath in chief and discuss her other lectures. So here we have a bunch of work by Bourassa. I have to download all of this before it gets censored. Look at this. Look at all these people she's worked with. Oh my goodness. Look at how many papers she has her name on. She's a master. Canadian psychology, mental health. Well, oh man. This woman is a master. APA. Perfect. Thank you. Mental wellness. The APA. Carrie Bourassa. From the APA to the CIA, intersectionality is integral to the logic of neoliberal colonialism. Thank you, Madame Carrie. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Look at how many papers she's got. Dude, this woman is cited so many times. Holy shit. Holy shit. Racism, sexism, and colonialism. The Understanding from Within project. Oh my God. Google Books. Cultural Safety, 2016. Oh my goodness. Oh my God. Oh my God. Engaging the community. Listening to the beat of the drum. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Look at all of this crap. Oh my God. The impact of socioeconomic status on Métis health. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Addiction treatment models. Hey, how about stop? Oh my God. Oh my God. Look at how much grants she's gotten. Look at how much bullshit she's gotten. Look at how much support this woman has gotten from lying, from her crocodile tears, from the emotional labor of her performance. The Sweat Lodge and the Ivory Tower. Perfect. I mean, look at this work, man. This is colonization and health. White mother to a dark race. How does she even produce all of this work? You see, ideology runs our society, not merit. It's just pure ideology. American Psychological Association. Racism, sexism, and colonialism. The impact of the health of Aboriginal women in Canada. Oh my God. The Understanding from Within project. Both those living with a neurological condition and their caregivers conceptualize and experience dementia. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. This is so crazy. Cultural safety is a broad term. Thank you, Carrie. It was developed in the 1980s in New Zealand, response to indigenous Maori people discontent with nursing care. When is this going to stop? When is this bullshit going to stop? I really hope this Carrie Bourassa case wakes people up from wokeism, but I'm not sure. So I'm just going to spend a moment just to talk about Patanjali, the dude who was hiring people based on merit, cited by 8,276 people. This guy's an actual academic writing about, I don't know, photon whatever and physics. Oh my goodness. Like, the guy who's a real academic got fired because he wanted to work with other real academics. And the sociopath who wanted to, nationalize her affirmative action campaigns keeps going up the ranks because she calls herself a minority. The person who plays the race card versus the person who refuses to play the race card. And this guy, I understand why he was a little bit arrogant in terms of thinking he could take on the ideology. Because look, this guy's cited like crazy in all of these like crazy physics journals, semiconductors and stuff I don't understand, nanocrystals and whatever. He has real papers compared to Carrie, who has all of these idiomatic bullshit. What a crazy society, topsy-turvy clown world we live in.
I'm going to talk a little bit about Indigenous plant medicine and protecting our home fires through Indigenous plants. Through my lab, we when COVID-19 hit, we asked communities, how can we help, what can we do, how can we serve you in the distress and time. And so we developed a program called Protecting Our Home Fires, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit about that today as we go through the presentation. And I want to acknowledge our partner, CABI, the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, who has really assisted us with much of our program of protecting home fires. So if you wanted to flip the slide for me, Pamela, that would be great. So first of all, I want to acknowledge the
land acknowledgement
facilitating this webinar on, which is Treaty 7 territory, the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. And of course, the opportunity to acknowledge the land where I'm presenting from, which is Treaty 6 territory, the traditional territory of the Cree, Dene, Nakota, Lakota, Dakota, Saulteaux, and homeland of the Métis Nation. And for me, I'm actually originally from Treaty 4 territory. I grew up with my grandfather in Regina in the Indian. If anybody's been to Regina, you probably will know or may know where Scott Collegiate was and has been transformed into a multi-center that serves the community. And I grew up right across the street from there. So I'm a Anishinaabe Métis. And, I always acknowledge my grandfather. I know I would not be here without him.
Without the bullshit about him.
Yeah. Acknowledging him and acknowledging the territory that I'm.
She humbly acknowledges her bullshit.
6 territory as well, and I'm very honored to work at the University of Saskatchewan on Treaty 6 territory. If you wanted to flip the slide. Oh, we can jump over this. I'll just. I think we've talked enough about me.
Dr. Bourassa is a scientific director. And she uses the same fucking picture everywhere. Oh my god. What a fraud. 20 years of fucking grant writing. Free grants. Morningstar Lodge.
I've always said from the day that I became scientific director about 3.5 years ago is I believe that Indigenous communities should be leading in the Indigenous health research agenda in Canada, full stop. And so, we're just here to support them in whatever level.
Maybe it's because we don't have any of our own ideas.
To the very end, or, to the level that they're comfortable with. So, this is really about valuing and including Indigenous knowledges and systems. And if anybody's heard me speak before, then you'll hear that I constantly say that Indigenous knowledge is science.
She constantly repeats the same idioms.
That people understand the value of Indigenous knowledges as science and as systems.
Do you, Carrie?
We hear about capacity building, and capacity building is
capacity building again, guys.
It's about what the communities see. What kind of capacity do they need, and how can we support that?
We need more empty rhetoric.
That is.
We need more empty rhetoric. We need more intersectional empty rhetoric. We need more pop psychology.
We'll go out and support them. So we
support.
Community and say, hey, we have this research.
Yeah. We don't go into a community and repeat the same idioms over and over again.
It's a very rare thing that we will do. I think there's 1 or 2 occasions where there has been, an opportunity that presents, and we've said, there's absolutely no pressure. But if we don't engage with an Indigenous partner, this may be a lost opportunity. That's very, very rare. Communities come to us and they ask us, this is an issue that's important to us, and this is what we need. Can you do this? Because it has to come from community. It cannot be, research.
There is no community anymore. You know why there's no community anymore? Because of the intersectional destruction of emotional labor. Nobody wants to talk to each other anymore. Nobody wants to do the hard work anymore. You said it yourself.
Agreement is open. They can change it at any time. They can withdraw at any time. But we are there to serve them.
Intersectionality has destroyed community.
We learn, so much from communities, and it is, ensuring that reciprocal relationship.
Is she citing herself again?
And culturally,
fucking
because as
evil
research goes on, there's outputs, and it can't just be journal publications. Although certainly communities are active parts of that, they're engaged, they are all named on the publications. And if they don't want a publication to go out, it does not go out. But there's so many other things.
Oh.
Build, for example.
Yeah. So they regulate information too. By the way, these ivory towers.
And that's all led by community. And so, that culturally socially safe practice is coming from the community. And so all we are is really just supporting that and making sure that they have.
All we do is just repeat the same rhetoric over and over again. And
also, of course, follow OCAP in terms of autonomy and ownership and data sovereignty. And we right now hold the data, through a data partnership, a data agreement. But my goal is that they will have the infrastructure to hold their own data when they are ready. We are just stewards at this time. But that is really about goes back to that.
Look at what kind of evil people are stewards of intersectionality right now. So, she's really good at applying for grants. She knows how to tick the right boxes and get the right affirmative action.
Many of the grants that we apply for, All Nations Hope is one of our partners, and Margaret Kiskakiesis, she is the NPI on a $1 million grant.
Oh.
We know that this model works, and
this model works. Ching! This model works. For getting federal grants. Oh, look, we're going to get the same bullshit again.
Prioritize Indigenous research methodologies. Western methodologies, but
we do.
Prioritize Indigenous methodologies, and we've developed very new and innovative methodologies as well.
Oh, look, there's a picture of the moon ceremony again.
A full moon ceremony.
Oh yeah, you said that before.
In our lab. And when we undertake training, it isn't just about sort of the typical training you might think in a lab. The training, we consider training also in terms of spirituality and well-being.
Oh yeah, the whole process of propaganda, not just a specific academic propaganda, but we also try to religiously indoctrinate people as well.
Incredible ceremonies through our elders, that is considered to be, part of training, as part of their learning.
Oh.
And they get that counts. So if they go for a full moon ceremony, I don't expect them to not get paid for that. They'll get paid for going and learning.
The moralization of the commodification of emotional labor.
And we're actually developing, a manual that other labs might want to.
Neoliberal colonization.
We're getting a lot of requests saying, well, how can you manage this? How do you manage when people want to go to ceremony? How do you do this? And so, we're hoping this will be helpful to other organizations who also have elders and also include ceremony. If you want to flip the slide.
God damn it! I hate ritual. Is my thing, bro.
Learning. Again, this is sort of goes hand in glove with what I was just talking about, because we encourage our staff to be out on the land. We do medicine picking, and
these are actually real citations.
That this is part of our learning. So one of our guiding elders.
Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. We're doing a real critique here. These are all really good quotes.
And we take things from our land.
Can she stop with the idioms, or is she just a bunch of empty idioms?
We are doing work around foraging, and again, we put out.
She has no ideas of her own. So now I'm going to show you some real-world, actual colonialism taking place.
That they want to know how, like my fellow elder Dennis just mentioned, the red tea, how much you need. They want to know all that, and what is it for, and what's the component, how long do you boil it, when do you pick it. We don't mind sharing that, but we don't mind sharing it with students that they're going to teach. But imagine, I think they need an elder every single time in class, and if they actually go out to the land. Because we've got a lot of herbalists here that specialize in different. So that whole cultural property right is kind of hanging over my head. I don't mind sharing, and I know Peter doesn't mind sharing, because William has a collection and jars of seeds. And even he came across tobacco seeds that are almost, I think he said over 125 years old, that were in the ground and in somebody else's possession. So imagine this old tobacco that he wants to grow, and the tobacco is used in our medicine pipe bundles and other ceremonies. So that's where we're at, and that's where I'm at. I don't mind sharing as long as somebody, I guess, is respectful and doesn't claim it. So that's where we're at.
So this is we're going to see some real-time colonialism happening here. There's Zoshana Zuboff. She talks about in her book, Surveillance Capitalism, how she makes a distinction, or she makes a comparison between how we sign away our rights using Facebook or whatever, when we see like Apple's security contract, and we just unknowingly click yes, agreement. It's very similar to how the Europeans would go into different tribes and make chiefs basically sign a piece of paper that they didn't understand fully. It wasn't a fully authentic piece of paper. It wasn't a fully authentic consent, let's say. And look at how colonialism happens today.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I guess I've been just really blunt in that the communities own their own data. We develop a partnership agreement that says as such, and we don't. So that includes, so data includes, for example, anything to do with elders' knowledge, indigenous knowledge, medicines, and that is not the property of the university. Full stop. That is the property of the communities, and that is that. So we are stewards of actual data, for example, because it has to be housed somewhere. But it is not the property of the university, and that is just, we've made that very clear. So we embed any protocols that the communities want, whether it's OCAP, whether it's something, whatever it is, and they sign that agreement, and that it's not, the universities don't, they don't get the data. It is housed at Morningstar Lodge for now, and it should be housed in their own communities as they have the ability. So maybe we can. I'm happy to chat and see how we can assist you in that regard, because you should not have to have that issue. You're sovereign. Your knowledge is sovereign, and you should have the ability to create those parameters and even create the partnership agreement with them. Like I can't understand how they're trying to engage you in that way. That's not how we do it.
Thank you, Dr. Bourassa. I have some more questions. Dolores says, as an individual Canadian who works for an agency that serves Indigenous people, how can I bring this kind of reconciliation to the clients that I work with?
So I think probably
these questions are really interesting.
A lot of the principles that I shared in the presentation. I'm happy
because you can really see the bullshitting.
And I could get a little bit more detail of how I might be able to support that. But I think it sounds to me like that it's allyship is what it sounds to me.
Oh,
I think that's very important. If
thank you. Another buzzword.
Present something that'll.
It's so cringe. Allyship.
The next question.
She has an idiomatic response for everything.
Plant-based and land-based teachings of medicine to Orange Shirt Day and honoring residential school attendees.
Sorry. I guess I didn't make it explicit that this is really a form of reconciliation, and should be seen as reconciliation. I think certainly, and I think even just what Mike raised, that Elder Mike raised, that when you cannot have your own knowledge held and undertaken at your own direction, I don't see that as reconciliation, right? That's not reconciliation. So we still have a long way to go, I think, although this is a very good start. And I think this means that there has to be a lot more conversation around data sovereignty, around Indigenous knowledge, and what this all means. Because it's clear
what does it mean, Doctor?
One way forward. But I do certainly think that this could be a really great start.
More empty rhetoric.
I'm not sure if you know, but the Reconciliation Committee had purchased 700 orange T-shirts, and then we asked people to wear them on Orange Shirt Day.
Oh yeah, I'm going to wear an orange shirt.
Yeah, of course I will.
Just I think there's still more work to do, but I got my orange shirt. Oh yeah.
Thank you. Okay, the next one. It says it's from Mara Hanahan. Great, Carrie. Great work you and yours are doing, and keep it up. Can you talk a bit about urban health advancement and sovereignty and Indigenous people? Since more than half of Indigenous people in Canada live in the cities, and many are living outside of their own territories.
Good question.
Thank you, Wilalwin.
Really good question.
It's a great question, and I think I come from an urban community, so it is something that it is a difficult question, but it is an important one. And I think also, I did get a chance to mention that, for example, good food boxes and food sovereignty is still a huge priority for urban communities. I think we have to do much more. And even, finding out, so how can urban communities get out onto the land, first of all? If you can't, then what can we do in urban space? And how can we create, space for people who want to learn about medicines in an urban setting? And also in terms of people who, for example, go to good food boxes, we know that for Indigenous communities, we hear a lot about, but none of, this isn't really what I need, right? So there's a whole lot more that needs to be done for Indigenous communities around food sovereignty in urban settings. We have worked with elders right now in terms of giving good food boxes in urban settings, but I think we have...
That's not a solution.
Which is a Métis organization, and we did send out good food boxes there, but that's just scratching the surface. We have so much more to do.
Oh yeah. Again.
I'm really glad you raised this question because
she keeps repeating these
and just
empty verbiage.
With elders in urban communities can be very difficult. So a long more way to go.
There's nothing of substance here.
Okay, this one's from Brian Anderson. Do you feel that Indigenous oral tradition is gaining a rightful and an understood place within our standard Western Eurocentric academia and research?
A lot of good questions happening.
And I'm happy to see it. I'm trying very slowly to reclaim my language, and it's let me tell you, very slowly. But I think with COVID-19.
Yeah, because it's not your language.
Translate.
Oh, so cringe.
More and more of the fact sheets. That was just wonderful, and it really took off, and it was more than just the translations in Saskatchewan. It went well beyond that. So I think we're starting to see this, and it is incredible, and it's really wow. We talk about reconciliation, right? Language.
Wow. Wow. Our languages are disappearing, you fucking ignoramus.
So I'm allowing...
That's what the question was about.
The name that I was honored with from the grandmothers and grandfathers is Water Lily, and I'm at the Bear Clan, and I'm from Saugeen First Nations here in Manitoba. On behalf of all of us, I asked the ancestors and the Creator and the grandfathers and the grandmothers to be with us today and to be with this young doctor that's coming to speak to us and to learn from her on...
I wonder what the ancestors think.
This past several years of reconciliation and truth. In my language, I have tried to translate what reconciliation is in our Indigenous language. And the best way that
this is so sad
was the way to say that was Chibune Daman. Pune Daman means, literally translating it, is forget about it. But that's not what that means, because we have to continue to try and reconciliate our spirit all the time for the past things that have happened to our people, some of the atrocities that have taken place. And so always we have to live with that and to live with it to the best of our ability every day of our lives. So in order for us to begin that healing process as Aboriginal people, Ojibwe and Cree and Dene and Inuit people and all of the people that are here in Manitoba, the different nations, is that we have to reconcile within ourselves and to begin that healing process. So on behalf of all of us, and a special thank you to Dr. Carrie for being here today.
I mean, it was literally just there. She just said, forget about it. This was Morgan Freeman's thing. Stop talking about it. This is the colorblind thesis that has been attacked by intersectionality. And it's right there. She just said, I'm not saying forget about it, but it's probably a deeper understanding of that. But this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about just looking at the past through the lens of academia. Academia doesn't help. It blurs.
Okay. And she will enlighten us on how we can do that.
Okay. Let's get ready for some enlightenment, guys. Thank you for that land acknowledgement. Thank you. That wasn't a land acknowledgement. That was an actual prayer.
I'd like to introduce Dr. Marcia Anderson Dakota. She is the head of the section of First Nations, Métis and Inuit Health with the Department of Community Health Sciences. So over to Marcia.
Okay, so first, Marcia. Dude, this lady is getting 3 introductions. That's crazy.
Professor of Indigenous Health Studies at First Nations University of Canada and a special advisor to the President of Research. Dr. Bourassa is the nominated principal investigator in the Canadian Foundation for Innovation grant, which funded Indigenous community-based...
She's really good at grant writing. She's really good at bureaucracy.
Based on her dissertation, was released in the fall of 2012, entitled Métis Health, The Invisible Problem. Her research...
Okay, we got to take a look at that book. All right, let's... So I have a chapter of her... I have a chapter that she wrote in one of the books that she wrote an introduction to. And I have her thesis dissertation here. Look at this. Library Archives of Canada. The Canadian government funded this. All of these people are complicit. Ronald Sterling, John Conaway, Bonnie Jeffrey, Faculty of Social Work, Department of History, Faculty of Education. All you people are terrible people. External Examiner. Let's look at who Ronald F. Liberté is. Fucking failure. That's what you are. Sorry, he's dead. I shouldn't talk about him. Okay, well, all right. Sorry about that. Let's go to co-supervisor. Well, I mean, he's the main supervisor, and he's gone. So, I mean, rest in peace, I guess. 2012. Let's look at his work. Because this is the person who kind of enabled everything. External examiner. So, I mean, it's important, right? To...
The Ji Hee Wei Shannon Foundation Inc. Métis Award in Health and Science. She's Métis, belongs to the Regina Riel Métis Council number 34. She resides in Regina with her husband Chad and is a proud hockey mom to her daughters.
Oh, she's married to Chad.
Now, most of the time, especially with people I know, I've known Carrie for a few years now. Actually, I remember being, when I went to Saskatoon as a resident, and I started to see all these publications from this Dr. Carrie Bourassa. And I kept wondering, well, who is she? Like, who is this girl? And then I had the pleasure of meeting her and started to her. Normally, I talk more about, personal connections and stuff when I'm introducing a speaker like this, but I wanted to read Carrie's brief bio today. She actually has a longer one, too, because I just feel so proud of her and all of her accomplishments as a leading Métis health researcher. So...
It's so crazy.
Please join me in welcoming her and really congratulating her on all of her work and accomplishments.
All of her accomplishments of repeating rhetoric and idioms and all this bullshit that she's written. Amazing. Thank you. Oh my goodness.
If I could, it is on. Jeez, you said it was on.
Look at her. She's a fucking sociopath.
I'm ready to come up here. Thank you so much, Marcia, and thank you, Elder Margaret, for that wonderful prayer and for the really warm welcome. I really am going to cry.
Oh, I'm going to cry. My crocodile tears.
I love the people here, and there's so many amazing people and wonderful friends. So nothing like being here. It actually feels
all built on a lie.
I'm super excited to come here today, with one exception that my daughter's playing hockey today, and I rarely miss. So you must be pretty special people.
Oh my God, her daughter is going to be so fucked
my
up.
daughter's a goalie. She plays competitive hockey. She's a AAA hockey player, and so you're going to hear some hockey stories today. I'm not going to lie. I try to avoid bringing my ceremonial items, but Darlene was good enough to give me some tobacco and take me out to the wonderful courtyard that's been blessed and that you're going to have access to here. So I did that, and my cookum also put tobacco out for me this morning. So I feel like today will be a good day.
I wonder how the ancestors will respond to this.
My cookum also helped me with some words. I'm trying to really say things in a good way. So I want to honor the land that we're on, which is, traditional.
Let's say things in a good way. Let's repeat. I'm going to repeat my. Oh.
And I was trying to think when Kathy asked me to speak. She said, it's reconciliation, and I wanted to think about what I was saying, and I'm trying to.
Yeah, stop lying.
I'm Tlingit, I'm Anishinaabe, I'm Métis, I'm all of those things, and I don't choose any one of them. So I said to Cookum, I want to say, the words.
I hope your Russian ancestors
in the language I'm trying to learn. And,
make you pay for this.
Doing very well at it, so please don't come and speak to me in Anishinaabe. I won't understand you, but I'm learning.
Of course you won't.
So she said, the grandfathers told her that.
Please don't. Please don't.
My presentation should
hold me accountable.
The word should be healing path, and it's Najimu Makana. And
the Najimu Makana.
What we're trying to get to, right? We're trying to, with the research we do.
That sounds like Hakuna Matata.
By communities, for communities.
Sorry,
it's a healing path. We're looking for a healing path.
And
so I want to.
Hakuna Matata. Hakuna Matata.
It wasn't a healing path, and where was I'm a conduit. That's all I am. The communities.
You're a conduit for bullshit. Okay, you're a medium.
To do that.
For the.
I didn't have a career path. Didn't plan to be a professor. Didn't plan to.
Yeah, because you started one little lie and it grew and it grew.
I always tell my community partners, "You're the boss."
Yeah, because I have no idea what I'm doing here.
Ability to do that. And sometimes
I'm here because I'm a liar.
understand these.
I'm trying to translate.
Right? What does CHR mean? What does shirk mean? How do we?
What does any of this mean? Who am I?
But you know what you
I'm married to a Chad.
and only you know what you mean. So with that, I'm going to try and see if we can look at what research means.
Oh.
So I want to start with looking at research as a way of life, because if anybody thinks that our communities didn't know what research was, I really, really want you to think about that again, because there's no way we could have survived without research. You know, Mike Oakham told me that, and she's got many, many examples, but all of our elders, any elder I've ever worked with, has always said, you know, research was how we survived, it's how we lived. It was in every aspect of our being. It's how we woke up every morning.
I feel so bad for all the people that have wasted their lives
Because we had to.
with this
So I want to start
fraud.
with a quote from Elder Peter Waskahat, who was a treaty elder in Saskatchewan. He said, "We have our own teachings, our own education system. Teaching children that way of life was taught by grandparents and extended families. They were taught how to view and respect the land and everything in creation. And through that, young people were taught how to live, what the Creator's laws were, what the natural laws, what were the First Nations laws, the teachings that revolved around a way of life that was based on their values." So research was ingrained in our everyday life. So
And then the academics,
any Indigenous people.
fucking academic colonizers.
And that's, you know, when I work with Indigenous people, that's where unfortunately, we have to acknowledge the history of research as exploitation.
Oh.
This is not something that everyone wants to acknowledge. It's not something that, especially when I talk to a group of academics, that it's something people are proud of, or even something that was done in a meaningful way. It's not like everybody.
Or even as exploitation, not even set up. Yeah, that's you.
A few examples.
Oh, you're the best example.
People have coined, you know, this term sort of as helicopter research. You know, Indigenous people feel like
How about helicopter? Come into the communities.
Like helicopters, they've come in, sort of taken information out of the community, and it has further marginalized their communities. It hasn't helped them. In some ways, it's even
you.
And they're not prepared to accept that any longer.
You're not. Yeah, we're not going to accept that any longer. You.
Still happens.
It's still happening right now.
More frequently than you even can imagine.
More frequently. I'm right in front of your face.
But
yeah, like right now. It's coming to light. I'm doing it.
She told me a story. She lived up in Shoal Lake, Manitoba, and she said when she was young, she can remember being met. This is kind of funny. I mean, you have to laugh. Our humor is what got us through things.
Yeah, I have to laugh.
So she told me, she said, you know, when I was in grade 3 or so, I can remember the whole year we were being measured. Our heads were being measured, and you know everything. They'd come in and measure us. And she said, but I particularly remembered my head being measured. And she goes, I thought I was going to get a new hat at the end of the year, and I was waiting for this new hat. And I was so disappointed.
I thought we were going to get a real academic research paper.
When am I going to get my new hat? And
when are we going to get an actual non-bullshitting intersectional person?
Right? It was an experiment, right? And she doesn't know really what.
When are we going to get authentic?
Of course, but you know, obviously there was some kind of experiment happening.
Critique of intersectionality. When are we going to realize that intersectionality is integral to the colonization, to neoliberal colonialism?
It wasn't that long ago that this was occurring.
When are we going to stop repeating the fucking idioms and the rhetoric?
Charted people's nutrition and human biomedical experiments in residential schools.
Yeah, we all know that shit.
52.
Yeah, we all know that shit. That's not how neoliberal colonialism works. That's just normal colonialism. Neoliberal colonialism is you.
I can tell you that it happened to him.
It's happening right now.
Document them, although we need that.
It's much more sophisticated now.
Evidence to show that it has happened.
Fucking sociopaths.
Research also is conducted without consent, and we have some contemporary examples of this. So biological samples being obtained and removed.
Consent.
There's a recent example on Vancouver Island that was documented. There's smaller things like, you know, where research just simply is not beneficial to the community, where research is certainly done for research's sake because somebody just finds it interesting.
That's important, actually. Research for research sake is really important.
Universities where, you know, you find something that you as an individual are interested in, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you're interested in it, and so then you find, you know, a community where you can carry out that interest. But at the end of the day, if that community is not benefited from it were First Nations people, that's not acceptable.
She's not an academic. She has no idea what academia is.
In academia.
Oh, paradigm shift. Another idiom. We need more paradigm shifts, everyone.
Métis people, Inuit people, they're not going to be subjects of research anymore.
Oh, they're not subjects of research. They're objects of research. Oh, they have to subject it. Oh, more idioms.
Right? We don't have
more rhetoric.
Right? We can't. We can't accept that anymore. They released a
pop psychology again.
The profile of Métis health status and healthcare.
You can always find pop psychology allied to intersectional bullshit.
Here, you can see the two.
I wonder why. I wonder why there's distrust.
So it definitely depends on those geographical locations and those experiences. So in some cases, we've been forgotten, and in other cases, there has been some bad experiences.
Oh yeah, we have been forgotten.
And exploitation.
You're the exploiter.
And then if we start to think now and turn to ethical research, what does ethical research mean?
She's going to teach us about ethics now, guys.
Some Indigenous principles and concepts. And I use the term Indigenous. I know it's more of an international term, but I use it the way Dr. Sean Wilson uses it in his book, Research as Ceremony. It's
I love that book, by the way. That's a great book.
Term in Canada, Aboriginal, in our Constitution, it refers to Inuit and Métis people. And so that excludes non-status people. And I think Indigenous is a more inclusive term because it includes everyone.
It includes me. I'm from Russia.
The ancestors of the first peoples of this land. So it includes all of us. And that's why I use the term Indigenous. So I just want to make that disclaimer if you're wondering why I continue to use that term. So today's research landscape is rapidly changing. And Indigenous people are starting to take control of the research process, which is how it should be. I mean, you have to think that the Indigenous population in Canada, our health status is not only not getting better, the gaps are widening, right? So if you think about immigrant status, when immigrants come to Canada, it takes about 2 generations before they reach equitable status with the rest of Canada, the rest of the Canadian population. But Indigenous population, the gaps are widening. That needs to be cause for alarm. So what is it about the Indigenous population?
Yeah, immigrants from Russia that take up research positions through affirmative action grants.
Be a cause for alarm. Anybody in here that's healthcare.
Taking up space.
So to me, this means that
I don't like using those idioms, but
in the Indigenous communities, and it needs to be driven by Indigenous communities. So dialogue, for example, must become a central feature of a new relationship between Indigenous people and other traditions of knowledge. That ethical space between cultures offers itself a theater for cross-cultural dialogue for the objective of ethically engaging different knowledge.
There can be no cross-cultural dialogue as long as we moralize the commodification of emotional labor.
Silos. That's not what I mean. That's not what I mean at all. What I mean is Indigenous people need to be equally engaged. Okay? Does that make sense? So if we talk about ethical research and we talk about Indigenous principles and concepts, and these aren't universals, right? So what I'm trying to do is sort of throw out some concepts based on some of the work that people like Sean Wilson have done and Margaret Kovach, and then some of the experience that I've had. If we think of concepts,
I like that.
I think these are probably concepts that anybody could get behind. So if you think about some of the concepts I'm sharing here, I hope you'll just think about it. Is this a concept I could get behind? If I'm working with any community,
yeah, I need empty rhetoric that there's no conflict.
Why it's not a concept you can get behind, but
then we can all get behind it. So that I can repeat these idioms wherever I go.
Reciprocity is a concept in our community.
Who can disagree with these concepts? Equality, respect.
I mean, if I give
this is how feminists argue.
To an elder, or if I give tobacco, if I go to Barry and I give tobacco to him. Right.
This is how feminists argue, right? Like, oh, feminism is about equality. So if you don't like equality between men and women, then you're not a feminist or whatever. Well, excuse me, are men equal to other men, for example? Just the lack of taking on the idea of conflict. Conflict is central. Conflict is how we move forward. Not everybody agreeing with everything. Okay? You can see holism, giving back, building relationships. Oh, all of the wonderful. This is a really good case in point. This is why I'm focusing so much on her, because everything she says, we can see that everything this person is saying is pure bullshit, because she's a bullshitter person. And because of that, we can become more critical. Okay, why am I focusing so much on her? It's because, not because I have any personal vendetta. It's because she opens up a beautiful gateway. Okay, unknowingly, she opens up a beautiful gateway of how we can be really critical of how we open the door towards neoliberal colonialism from unseen entrances. Okay, we talk about all of these, kumbaya things, which I totally agree with, which I think we should totally do. But getting to the kumbaya, we can only get there through the devil's advocate. The devil's advocate is the gatekeeper to kumbaya, not this saint, this false prophet. False prophets don't open the door to kumbaya. It's the devil's advocate that does it.
I'm going to ask him for something. I'm going to give him something.
Oh, that's economics, not reciprocity. That's economics.
That's our way. I'm not saying it has to be your way. That's our way. But reciprocity.
That's economics, lady.
If you're asking somebody for something, you're going to give something back. So if you're going into a community to do research, if you're asking a community for something,
you don't ask. You give. You only give. You only give. You never ask.
It's a pretty basic principle.
It's a basic principle because it's a basic principle of economics.
Way. And
that's not reciprocity.
But they need to benefit. And I don't
read some Derrida.
Community, or
it's about
farming community.
Just giving for the sake of giving.
Community.
Not asking for anything.
I think reciprocity is a basic concept that needs to be in research.
It's called hospitality.
Because of where we are today.
Hospitality, an ancient concept, Babylonian concept. I can speak on it.
It's really important, and I'm sure many of you have heard this before. The collective has always been important, and it probably goes back.
We have heard this before because you're full of rhetoric.
The way that our communities have always been. That even at the time, if I think of, you can think of it from the Métis way, where we, even when we had families, we still had large kin families, and
kin-based labor is destroyed.
Took care of each other.
Yeah,
even though we may have farmed on plots of land, and we still had that community essence, right? That collective essence.
Yeah, that's gone.
First Nations way.
Because of the moralization of the commodification of emotional labor and the destruction of kin-based labor.
We made decisions together, right?
We aren't able to take on that complicity.
We all come together. And in fact, it kind of confounded people because the treaty commissioners, because when the chiefs were supposed to be making the decisions, they didn't make the decisions. Where did they go? They went back to the community, right? And the communities were making the decisions.
Yeah, that's good.
Women had a large say, actually. I won't even get into that. I could get into it and say that the women actually, owned the lodges, by the way, and had a large say in the community, but it was communities, right? Collective was important. You took care of your communities, and it still is important. So reciprocity in the collective.
This is from 2015. So this is from 2015. So she hadn't fully taken on the moralization of the commodification of emotional labor idiom when she takes on a couple of years later. So in 2015, people were saying that, but then the it's too much emotional labor argument became more popular later on. And she does take it up. We went through it. So we're going back in time a little bit through this discovery of this person, this fraud, this sociopath.
And building relationships. If there's nothing more important when it comes to research, you have to build that relationship. If you're going to do research in Indigenous communities, you're going to have to build that relationship ahead of time. And it can take a long time. Even in my own community, where I am from, it took us 2 years to get our community survey.
Yeah, because you're not in that community.
To build those relationships, we needed to repair some of the damage that research had done. My own adopted sister, refused to get involved with the research, even though our board had approved.
Oh my God.
The research.
She's talking about the sister that outed her adopted sister. So she has a whole storyline for that.
She did not want to get involved in the research because she did not see the benefit in it.
The reason why she didn't want to get involved is because she knew it was all bullshit. Oh my God.
Research was helicopter research. She said, I love you, sis, but I don't think that it's a good idea because I will
Helicopter.
and your suit for the meetings, but I'm not getting involved. I said, I'm not getting, she was just, she didn't want to, and when she didn't get involved, she was a pillar in the community, a lot of people didn't want to get involved. And she's my adopted sister and she loved me. So when we had our meetings, she'd come in and she'd sort of throw the food down and she'd leave and everybody saw that.
You have to get involved with my lie. Why aren't you getting involved with my lie? Oh my goodness.
A long while to really bring her around. And once we brought her around and once people saw she was engaged and she was actually involved.
Once she started bullshitting
people to do the surveys.
Oh my God.
Everything came together. And it was a tobacco project as part of the survey, and we started a Green Light project and tobacco-free homes. If you were tobacco-free home, even if you still smoke, but you were tobacco-free and you smoked outside, you get a green light bulb. I remember now
Look at her trying to
a lot of people wanted to
instill her sociopathy on other people.
It took off, and I remember being in Superstore one day, and this meeting woman comes up to me and she says, "Hey, you're the green light bulb lady," and I'm like, "Excuse me, I didn't really get the connection. I want my green light bulb. I'm a tobacco-free home now. I want my green light bulb." And we had run out of green light bulbs. Like there's a certain kind, And so I'm here, I'm like writing her name on the back of my receipt, trying to make sure she gets her green light bulb. But I mean, it just skyrocketed, and it really, really took off to the point that people were involved. But it took us 2 years in my own community and my own sister not wanting to be involved.
Wow.
4 years after that, we're at a provincial roundtable and she's pounding her fist on the table. We need more research in our communities, right? But even in our own community, we needed to build relationships.
Her sister is strong. Her sister is strong for coming out against the complicity.
Than any other community will be. And that giving back, reciprocity and giving back is really important. And that's kind of more at the end of that's like knowledge translation, right? What are you going to do at the end? How are you going to make sure the community understands what has happened with that project, what the benefits have been, where it's going? And for you academics, when you go to publish, how are you going to publish to make sure the community is satisfied with it? If you publish, how are they going to be named? How are they going to approve it? And what if they don't approve it? What if they say, no, we don't want you to publish? Then what do you do? Because if you look at my publication list, you might see that I haven't published out of a lot of my projects, right? Because they've said, we don't want you to publish. And then what do? You don't publish.
Yeah, I was trying to exploit. But they said, don't exploit us.
But remember,
what are you going to do?
It's the community that comes first. Because you have to check yourself and remember, what's your motivation? Why are you doing this?
Yeah, what is your motivation? Why are you doing this?
If you're doing it for other reasons, then you're in the wrong business.
Oh my God.
And holism is really important, right?
Holism.
Understand.
Yeah. Honesty, holism.
You might start out, we're doing a project right now, it's funded by CHR, it's called Digging Deep. It's an HIV/AIDS project working with Aboriginal women who are injection drug users, and we're trying to build a culturally safe model, but it's not going to stay like that. It's going to involve every aspect. It's going to involve mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, and you have to know that going in. And you have to be flexible and be really creative with your budgets, because it's not going to be the one thing you thought it was going to be going in. But
yeah.
Absolutely. 100% important to the projects that you take on. And responsibility. You have a responsibility, not only to the community that you serve, but I have multiple responsibilities, right? You have a responsibility, of course, to your ethics board, you have a responsibility to academia, you have a responsibility to your community. I have a responsibility to multiple communities, usually, right? But you have that responsibility to uphold those ethics and not compromise them to that community that you serve. And I'm not talking about the REB ethics. And those are important. But I'm really talking about the kinds of ethics that we're going to get to in a moment, the ethics to the community. Those are the most important ethics that you have to uphold.
Look at these sociopaths who teach us ethics.
That you will develop.
These neoliberal colonizers who teach us ethics. These intersectional colonizers.
Because when you work, say, with the community,
these academic rhetoric bullshit
right?
that teach us ethics.
REB says you must get a band council resolution. That's what ethics says. So you jump through the...
That's what ethics says.
It's splintered.
The law of ethics. The god of ethics.
But we're not really supportive of our chief. So we'll support you, but you got to be careful of the chief. And then you have the chief say, what did they just say to you? Right? And it's a tightrope. But you know that you're there for the importance of that community. So
it's a tightrope, and you need a liar to balance all of those.
And not every community is like that. Every community is absolutely different. Right? And I remember one time, I won't name the community, they were awesome, but the elder actually got me involved in this project, and he said, hey, we want you to come in and do this work, it's so awesome, you got to do this, it's great, and yeah, they just need to meet you, just come to this little meeting. Well, it happened to be a chief and council meeting, and I walk in, and I'm not kidding, there was a table this long, one chair here, everybody else around, there was about 50 people in the room, and they grilled me for 2 hours, right?
And the elder is at the back of the room, kind of sitting there with his arms crossed, like kind of like smirking at me. Like he knew this was going to happen, but he didn't tell me. And he was on all my research committees too. And he knew it was going to happen, but he just didn't want to be nervous, I think. So after that, I walked out with him and I said, I don't think that they're going to want me to do this research. Like they just grilled me for 2 hours, right? You know, and I got all kinds of questions like, well, what does it make to you want to do research in First Nations communities? And I don't even remember what I said. I couldn't tell you. I was just so nervous. It was like I had this light shine right on me in this room.
She's a really good liar.
He calls me and says, so when are you going to come start this research? We're so excited. I just couldn't believe it. I was like, are you kidding? Really? I said, and who's this again? And he said his name. He said, it's Chief blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, like you really want me to come?
Chief blah, blah, blah.
We're so excited to have you.
She can't even remember.
For 7 years. It's been a great relationship. But sometimes, you know, they want to just make sure
Chief blah, blah, blah.
motivations are good.
Oh.
That you're truly there for the right reason.
You're truly there for the right reasons when you can't remember the chief that fucking allowed you to fucking do this shit.
That will happen. And they have every right to do that. Why? Because of what I said before, helicopter research, right? Why am I going in there? What are my motivations? What do I want out of this?
You know what's worse than helicopter research? Fucking covert, fucking neoliberal research that you're fucking doing. You fucking sociopath.
And what's the community ready for? What can you do with them? What kind of capacity building? Because you don't want to set the community up for failure. Don't go in and make promises you can't keep.
This is so fucking maddening.
What kind of capacity building can you do? Community control. What extent can the community engage? Right? And you do need to explore that with them because they might want to be involved in everything, but they might not have the capacity yet to do that. So explore that with them.
You see,
make sure that they are in control. Make sure they're in the driver's
colonialism always
to their level.
makes the sociopaths rise up the ranks.
Again, negotiate that.
The people who are hesitant
Collaboration, of course.
never rise up the ranks. The people who are ethical, they don't rise up the ranks.
Doing that is culturally responsive to their needs, whatever that might be. So those are the processes, and I mean there could be many more that you could list there. So now if we get into ethical research, there's all kinds of formal ethical processes. You know, the data is not accessible, the data is often inaccurate, and when First Nations people, you know, say that this isn't accurate, you know, there's either no response or a typical government response.
So when the data is not accurate, that means a sociopath can come in.
Do you want to do a study about us? Because we exist over here. We would love to have some birth rates and some mortality rates, but they don't listen to us at all. Research funding is largely
who wants that?
Actually,
who wants to be? I mean,
research funding largely. Oh no, I missed that.
Who?
Okay. Human remains and cultural property have been taken for storage, display in museums or sale, and we're just starting to really being able to get those remains back. So
imagine if she was continued to do this for another 20 years. She'd be like a museum director.
But just to sort of explain what ownership and control, access and possession means, ownership actually refers to the relationship of a First Nations community to its cultural knowledge, data, and information. And OCAP is really specific to First Nations. That's where I'm using that right.
Again, I'm going to show you guys an example of actual colonization happening, neoliberal colonization, neoliberal intersectional colonization. Okay? If you see my work, you see how important a handshake is. Okay, I spent a whole section on handshakes and how handshakes are incredibly important. Let's listen to this.
Maybe a nice thing to do. Forgive me if I should agree with them. I think that it's a must. If you're working with an Indigenous community, I think that it is an absolute must to have a data share or a research agreement.
You have to sign something.
If it says we don't need an agreement, that's fine. You know, because that's the community saying that. But I think it is really, really important for you to at least bring that issue up. In my community, when I brought up the issue, my Muslim happened to be the director, and he said to me, "What? My handshake's not good enough?" So, I mean, that was.
That is a key point. My handshake is not good enough? No. Okay? You need to sign a piece of paper that can be brought into the court of law. You need to be assimilated. And that's what her whole job is. Okay? A handshake, yes, a handshake should be good enough. Okay? Please, I'm going to play that one more time, okay?
Agreement. If the community says we don't need an agreement, that's fine. You know, because that's the community saying that. But I think it is really, really important for you to at least
bring that.
It's really important, not for you, for the colonizing state.
The issue. My mushroom happened to be the director. He said to me, "What? My handshake's not good enough?"
No.
I mean, that was pretty clear. I couldn't tell him, "No, you must have a research agreement with me." But that was his choice, right? That wasn't me saying, "Well, we don't need one because you're my mushroom." It was really important for me to make sure that discussion happened. Also, some communities are developing their own ethical guidelines, and this is really empowering and really important, and we're going to see a lot more of this. You have Manitoba.
If you didn't understand that point about colonialism, about the handshake being enough,
I just saw them on the website. They're fabulous. You have
the reason why a handshake cannot be enough is why neoliberal colonialism continues.
Island research ethics.
Why you can't dance in a courtroom.
At First Nations University, we are in the process of having our own Indigenous Research Ethics Board, and that should happen by April.
This is the ultimate form of neoliberal colonization.
And there's going to be more of this. So
there is going to be more of this.
More and more Indigenous communities developing their own guidelines.
Because that's how they are being colonized today.
I want to talk a little bit now
the money.
First Nation of my work and why I came here and why Kathy asked me to come here. Where does this culminate in terms of practical application and
how am I going to get that moolah?
Where we started at the beginning, a healing path.
Fucking healing path.
Indigenous community-based research by, with, and for Indigenous communities and reconciliation. When I started at First Nations University, I really had no idea how I had gotten there. I didn't plan that path, as I said.
Because you lied, and then the lie got bigger. We already established this.
After I finished my master's,
they were looking for tokens.
Ended up with tuberculosis, and I really didn't think I was going to do a PhD. I was tired, and I ended up at this institution, this wonderful institution, after I sort of got hit over the head a few times by the Creator.
Oh my God.
I ended up working.
She repeats her story over and over again, too.
That taught me, is what happened. And I applied for a Canada Foundation for Innovation grant in 2011. And everybody told me, what are you doing? Canada Foundation for Innovation, they fund science labs, right? Science labs, Carrie. Like, you're not going to get this grant. But I felt like, the community.
I felt like I could bullshit my way through the grant because I'm really good at grant writing and I'm really good at bureaucracy.
Even though I felt like it was a safe space, they were uncomfortable sometimes coming to campus. So I invited them to come, and they would sometimes come, but mostly they wouldn't come. So maybe I'll just show you the clip really quickly before I talk to you a little bit about the work, because Canada Foundation did fund me. I have 2 labs. I have Indigenous community-based health research labs. One is a student lab, one is a community lab. And it was the first time, I understand, that they funded such labs. And I'm not saying that because I think I'm great. I'm saying that because I did ceremony. My co-com and I did ceremony before we put the project in. And I'm saying it because I think that is an example of reconciliation. And it's important for communities, for the students that we're training. So I'm just going to really quickly.
An example of reconciliation is me getting a grant from the government for lying.
It's the only thing I have to show you.
Hello, my name is Carrie Bourassa. I'm sitting here at First Nations University of Canada in Regina, Saskatchewan, in the Indigenous Community-Based Health Research Lab. I'm honored to be sitting here because this is where a whole lot of work gets done with, by, and for Indigenous communities. Funding for the Indigenous Community-Based Health Research Lab is provided by Canada Foundation for Innovation. Thanks to CFI-funded labs, we've been able to train both Indigenous and non-Indigenous students on various projects. The community comes to me with their research needs and interests, and that's what drives my research interests. First Nations University is the ideal place to conduct research.
We need to end affirmative action bullshit as soon as possible.
The quality of life of First Nations people. For me to conduct research here, I feel safe and protected. I want to thank the elders, because without the elders and their guidance, the work we do would not be successful.
You can't formalize this process Okay? Yeah, we need more representation. But when you formalize the process, you get sociopaths winning. Oh my God. This is why the handshake is not good enough. That was a key point.
So I want to say two things. One is ceremony is essential. Every project we do, we start with ceremony.
I agree, ritual.
Elders lead it.
Oh man, that's amazing. That's like my dream job.
Every project I have, community members are on it. The project I have right now is funded by CHR. I have 3 of them, but the one that we are just getting going, the Digging Deep project, we have positive people on the project. We have community members on the project that have worked in the field for years. And to me, these are the experts. They know what they need. They're the ones that are telling us how to build the project, how to do the recruitment, what the methodology should be. So I wrote the grant knowing how to write the grant to get funding from CHR.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are going to tell us how to run the grant. 85% of the budget is going directly to All Nations Hope.
She's an expert rhetoric
I only kept it
person.
to have
She's an expert grant writer.
to run the analysis and train the community.
An expert bullshitter, basically.
On the analysis piece.
And guess what? I'm an expert bullshit detector.
Training is coming from the community, not from me. Because they have that lived experience, they have that knowledge.
They have that lived experience. Another one of these idioms.
Two-eyed seeing model, right? That Dr.
Stop using these idioms. Uncritical use of these idioms.
They have a whole lot to impart, right? That reciprocity that we spoke about. It's so very important to me to make sure that they inform me what is needed. And Margaret Petra is the executive director there, and I just call her boss woman. Like, she tells me what to do, and I do it. It doesn't mean I have conversations with her. It's the humor, right? Hey, boss woman, you tell me. And she just laughs to this big, Margaret, to this big boisterous laugh. But it's very, very important that we do things in the right way. Our first proposal.
She has no idea what she's doing. That's why she's not a subject.
We didn't get what we asked for. We got the full amount of funding, and I really believe it's because we did it in the right way. And ceremony is important. I think our elders are important. Our elders are fully involved in everything we do. So the labs have that space for our community members to come and hear video work. And those community members and elders, they will come and they will sit in that lab and they will edit video with us for hours on end, because it is important to them and they feel safe and they have that space to do that.
God, I wish I had a lab like that.
We do. Our training is actually going to take place at All Nations Hope, but we have that space when they need it. And that is their space. And sometimes I'm not even there when they use it. It's their space. They go and use it when they need to use it. That's what it's there for. I really encourage people, if this is something that's attractive to you at your institution, apply to CFI, use that space. Now I can't open this thing. Use that space. But the research landscape is changing. It must change. It must be led by, for, and with Indigenous communities. And it's not only going to be in academia. It's going to be out in the community. It's going to be out there. Very little is going to be in academia anymore. The future of Indigenous health research. I'm almost finished. I'm over time. You know me. Sorry, that's my MO. All Indigenous health research.
Gifts. And we gather those gifts and we give them at the back of time to thank them for giving access. That's what our project is doing. It's to honor the gifts of many to honor those women, honor those livelihoods who carry that.
Oops. The project, as you can see, is community-based. It's driven from community. All Nations Hope is our partner, but not really. All Nations Hope drove the project. I was merely the servant to the community. I was able to help find funding. That's what I did. Morningstar Lodge has been able to.
Yeah, she's a good grant writer.
And we were able to provide some training. The training, for example, as much as we.
The people who are actually trying to build something, they're terrible grant writers.
We provide, for example, in vivo and SPSS training and privileges.
The people who are actually trying to do something, they're the people that say that isn't a handshake good enough. Those are the authentic people. The people who know how to write grants, they know that grant writing is full of bullshit.
Methodologies. One of the training was also training, And not only did we gather all of the community researchers and the community members and our team, we also brought our children, and we brought everybody together. We brought community together. And in my opinion, the training from the tobacco ties and any of the other training that we did, it was training as much as, it was just as important as our engagement training was, right? To us, that's equally as important, if not more important. And when Kokum would have ceremony, we would never force anybody, but we pay our staff to go to ceremony, because
that is upholding the ritual of and the religion of capitalism over the people need to come from their own responsibility, not because of a profit motive. When you make it about a profit motive, the ritual becomes about the religion of Homo economicus. Okay? It's not a spirituality anymore. The ancestors will not show up if people are getting paid to show up. The moralization of the commodification of emotional labor is the ultimate form of neoliberal colonialism. You can't pay people to show up to ritual. People need to show up to ritual. People, that's what ethics is about. That's what responsibility is about. People need to show up to collective ritual out of their own initiative, out of a sense of responsibility, out of a sense of communal responsibility, like she was talking about. Right now, this is a 2020 lecture. You see how she takes up the public idiom really easily? In 2015, she talks about responsibility. That's what we were talking about back then. But then the feminists changed the model of how we have to do things. They moralized the commodification of emotional labor. They moralized that it's the ultimate form of neoliberal colonialism. People cannot get paid to do ritual. Okay? If you want to have some sort of pay, it has to be indirect. It has to be very indirect. Otherwise, it's a ritual ceremony towards the concept of money, not to anything else. You don't show up to appease and respect and uphold the ancestors because you're getting paid. In fact, if you are getting paid, you are undermining the ritual. Do you understand?
To us, Star Lodge is a mentorship lab, and it's a space where we serve community, but it's also a space where they're learning in a very different way than you might in a research lab. So when people hear research lab, it's like you gotta realize it's a much different research lab than you've ever seen before. And we're very blessed to have everybody.
Yeah, it's much different because it's run by a sociopath.
I do want to share a few important aspects of the work. What did we do? Everything starts from and when we ran into a snag, what did we do? We went back to ceremony. We always go back to prayer. When we say that spirit,
yeah, if everybody's getting paid to be in the ceremony, yeah. Let's have a ceremony every fucking second. We're getting paid for it.
How we ensured that spirit was exactly what we did. We incorporated indigenous methodology.
Oh, it's a lot easier to show up to ceremony when you're getting paid.
We wanted it to be, infused with spirit, because these were.
Spirit is not there.
These were like her words. We had to be so careful with them. These are their lives, and so
This is narcissism, not spirit.
We were imparting to our staff at Holy Star Lodge. These are people's lives. These aren't just stories. Right? So even when we were doing training around transcription, helping people to understand how very important.
Stories are living things, and a lot of.
Yes, we went through the sweat lodge first. At Elder Vegas, I remember we went through the sweat lodge first. Everything we did through ceremony. We had community-based research navigators that were in community that were at All Nations Hope.
I really hope people wake up from this wokeness because of Carrie. I hope that people can understand, but I doubt it. There's institutions still defending her.
As I said, we have indigenous methodologies, but we also, there's a lot of methodologies for collecting information. There's not as many indigenous methodologies for analyzing information and data. We adapted a methodology called the CCDAP. It's a methodology that was Dr. Judy If anybody knows Dr. Carrie Bourassa, she's a teaching assistant. She just retired, and she's fantastic, one of my mentors. And it's a methodology where everybody participates, community members participate, researchers participate, but it would take a very long time. So sometimes it would take 3-4 days, sometimes longer, and a lot of people can't take that long to come together to analyze data. So we've been able to adapt it so that you can have it done in a day or less and still have everybody participate. And we did this with the permission of Dr. Bartlett. And so this is how we've been able to actually have an indigenous methodology to analyze data, which we're publishing. So you have to publish if you want it to be validated on the Western side of things. But we're also creating a toolkit where community will be able to use it. And that's, I think, the most important part.
We're publishing it so I can get my name out and over it. She's a really good writer.
We had other ceremonies that was, other ceremonies at Health Federal, So this is the CCDAP, it's a collective consensus data analytic procedure. We had to change that name. So we want to do that in ceremony because that is not the name that you will just roll off your lips. So we definitely have to change that name, but we're going to do that as we have to, we do everything in ceremony. So
this is why you need more male leaders.
Recommendations for care, that there were some positive healthcare experiences. And again, we wanted this to be resilience-based, not a deficit approach.
They've cut out all the male influences, and so they create this agreement circle. See, males are disagreeable, right?
That recognition that colonization is at that root cause.
You're the colonizer.
As Jada was speaking, there's resilience and strength in the community. So there's some service provider some themes and some CCDAP themes as well. So
enough.
This is a quote from the participants. A pill isn't going to fix anything, What's going to fix it is like the psychiatrist. That's another thing. I'm surprised there's an actual psychiatrist or psychologist that's reading these surveys and taking the time to understand what it is with us, certain people that live with HIV and different.
Okay. Psychiatrists and psychologists are absolutely necessary. They're needed for neoliberal colonialism, okay? That's the next video series I'm doing. Those are integral, okay? You need these fucking people, okay? It's only the philosophers that actually can critique the psychologists and the psychiatrists because they are just as educated and they don't need to have. Oh my goodness. They don't follow the line. Philosophers never follow the line. They disagree with each other all the time. There's no consensus building in the it's always the devil's advocate. You need a devil's advocate.
That we can't maintain our health, that we have problems with maintaining our health, and it's because it's to do with the psychology of it. And the things that are going on in your life.
Pop psychology is ruining everything.
Your food and you're covered, how are you going to worry about your health? If you have an addiction problem, how do you worry about your health? And so
yeah, psychology is not an answer to any of that.
I have so many amazing things to share, but it's
the goal of psychology is to integrate you within the neoliberal colonialism. And that's what this woman's goal is too. She's getting people to sign agreements. Join this research committee. Join this research committee. Sign this grant. This is how neoliberal colonialism happens, right? Colonialism can't do the old school residential school hitting your head thing. They need these informants, these native informants to do their work for them. Native informants like Bell Hooks. Native informants like Roxane Gay. Native informants like Carrie Bourassa. These are how they control us.
Pretty obvious, right? Social determinants of health people, right?
Oh yeah, it's so obvious. Because, you know why it's so obvious? Because it's such a fucking idiomatic thing. We all know about this crap. When everybody says the same thing, you need to be critical. When everybody starts saying the same fucking thing, you need to be critical. Be really specific. Okay, yeah, I agree. Ceremony is incredibly important. But what do you mean? She never actually goes to talk about the phenomenology of ritual like I do, which is, I think, is incredibly important. You see, I'm here. The reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is to defend my own community from this neoliberal colonialism. Fuck you and your healing, bitch. Sorry. Oh, in the pit.
I'm not going to go through the word cloud, but those are really cool things. They're good visuals. We really wanted some visuals. We don't want our reports back to community to be, a lot of stuff. So,
Goodness.
in terms of accessing healthcare, he's been
Goodness me.
lack of provider expertise, lack of provider interest, confidentiality, lack of family support.
Goodness.
But there's also
The word cloud.
find ways to ensure that healthcare services are meeting that. Participants identified best ways to learn about HIV, talking with family members, talking with individuals living with HIV, skill building workshops, etc. We have a lot more that we could say, but we are limited to our time constraints, so we totally understand.
She always says this.
More information, please do let me know. We have a lot more we could share if you're interested. But this has led to next steps, which is a $5 million grant from CHR.
Oh my God.
Very clear. No conflict of interest here, but All Nations Hope did put in an application with Dr. Charlotte Lopi, and they were successful, and All Nations Hope is holding the grant. When I talk about capacity building, that is what you want to see. So, very happy.
You see?
That is the goal of where we're going at IAPH, which I had to make a choice of whether to talk about this, which is way more important than talking about where we're going.
$5 million of our tax money diverted by these sociopaths.
And that is what needs to happen. And it was, Dr. Jeff Redding and Dr.
Going to where?
Do that now, so that communities can hold grants, and that one day soon we're going to have elders being NPIs, and that's just how it needs to be. So more and more communities are going to be holding grants, and that's how it has to be, and it's how it should be. But so Code Away is the grant that was funded.
Dirty money.
And it really is taking the work.
You see, what did Dave Chappelle say? You need to get off the bus and walk. You need to put the money in the bus and walk. That's the only way to have revolution. These people have endless surplus capital, the colonizers.
The work that we wanted to do is asking women, without saying it, what would a culturally safe care model of care look like, right? We didn't say those words, but that's really what the project was about, and that's what Code Away is. It's an intervention based on digging deep. So we're really excited about it.
Dig deep, skin deep.
And so it's just pretty incredible. Morningstar Lodge is supporting some of the training needs, but we are not named in the grant, not part of the grant. But that's, I think All Nations Hope is identifying, look, we're ready to hold grants, but there are still obviously some gaps in terms of capacity building. This is what we need, and we want you to be part of that. So this is the last slide I'll show. This is the ultimate goal of Code Away is to develop, implement, and assess the impact of land and gender-based cultural interventions that address risk behaviors and context, mental health and trauma, and
more idioms. Idioms, idioms, idioms. You see that the people who are genuine critiquing, they don't get the grants. The people who repeat the party line get the grants. It's a sad, sad state of affairs.
I'm getting they're doing this to me now. And it's just, I guess what I want to say is it's so necessary. We sent in for ethic approval and we got denied because we were offering tobacco products. We sent it back with the teachings from the elders and we were denied because tobacco is bad for you. And this is so, and when you're talking about
SFU.
It's still a very bumpy road. And Harlan, I'm going to cut mine short so you get that last question. Only if it's quick. It's totally quick.
I just want to, again, Dansei, my relative. Thank you so much for your bravery, your story, and also holding space for our Two-Spirit relatives, and for your policy manual, and including our Two-Spirit people. In this conversation around HIV and AIDS, prevention, care, and treatment must include our Two-Spirit relatives, and for that space and the work, both Carrie, the elders, and Dr. King, all of your work in holding space for our Two-Spirit relatives, to ensure that we are front and center and included within this work. To call us home and to...
We want some of the grant money too, guys. Don't forget us.
Thank you so much.
At this time, I'd like to thank all our speakers. I'd also like to acknowledge our elders past, present, and emerging. I'd also like us to take the time to remember those that have gone on before us, and remember all of those that are still living with HIV, and all those who are affected by HIV. Remember the children that we've lost, the children that were born with HIV. There are
this is so sad.
Survivors. And one day, I would love to say, I used to have HIV. At this time, I would like to invite up to the stage Elder Roberta Price, our co-Salish elder, who will close the event for this evening. Elder Roberta? tell them that I carry this beautiful secret medicines that she offered me when we came together in Ontario to sit as elders and advisory to Dr. Bourassa in the work she does. And I want to share that, want to hold my hands up to you high for sharing, for the strength and the power that you share within your own life.
Look at that fake body language.
So they keep us alive, well. So I just want to share some teachings. I have the blessing and the grace to work with close to 30 elders in my journey. And I want to honor the teachings of one of my strong buddy mentor elders, and I'm wondering if somehow, or maybe we could just do it in rows because there's no space on the side. But Elder Vince's teachings and many other elders that when we come together, we must share a blessing and prayer. And what that blessing and the prayer, what it does, it covers our thoughts, it covers our words, it covers our interactions together. In that blessing and the prayer, what we do, Elder Vince's teachings are that we join hands. And when we join those hands, what we do is we put our left palm up to our person on our left. That left palm up is the Father's side. We put our right palm down to our person on our right. That right palm down is to Mother Earth. Elder Vince's other teachings are that our left palm up is to our ancestors. We're calling upon and calling down in the prayer.
I want to see her do it. Oh, what happened to the sound? Okay, let's just look at her do this.
So come as you are, how you feel comfortable, where you stand, and we'll say a blessing and prayer. My chair is pretty confused when I got my elders. Sometimes they know my right from my left. So our left palm is up and our right palm is down, and we'll say a blessing and prayer. We're giving you many, many thanks today for bringing us together in such a beautiful.
Look at how they exclude people. They exclude people. They exclude people. You can't exclude people, guys. This is why you need elder males. You need strong people to say that we can't exclude people. Okay? We can't exclude anybody. Man, I'm so fucking over this.
And for me, being a visitor here from my territory, from the territory, I was welcomed at this point from everybody. He welcomed so much brothers here, and again, welcoming here today. I was taught in my commission to always ask for permission, and that was our territory for about generations. Because we always had to ask for that permission to come to the territory, and we think that we can come to the territory, so in ways that we're getting I had a really good lesson just before I left. And one of them is that I think many Asian people, we don't talk enough about ourselves about some of the good things that happen in our life. And I think we sort of can't look at that. And I think that's important. But I was taught by an elder, the book launch that happened just across the way a while ago, that it's important to share good things that happen, so that we inspire other people and remind other people that Indigenous is Indigenous people, we're role models too, and we do good things. And so ever since I had that teaching from that elder, I started to share a little bit more about myself at every presentation, because I think that sometimes in the community we don't have time to share with
Yeah, you don't share when you're lying.
At the Royal Society of Canada, and there was 97 refugees, only 2 Indigenous people in it. And I'm sure it's a technical thing that I should know.
Yeah, because you're not one of them.
That I get some kind of
Why me? Because I'm a fucking bullshitter. I'm a great bullshitter. I'm a great grant writer. You were chosen for a reason. I think that she was, in fact, chosen for a reason. And here's my spirituality. She was here to wake the fuck up the woke people. Now, there's 2 paths that can happen here. And I'm really worried because we're going to take the wrong path. And I know it. The 2 paths are that we start to understand, okay, that we need outside criticism. That criticism cannot work within our polarized, citational echo chamber that we've created, that she's a part of. That she's able to rise up the ranks because of this polarized, citational echo chamber. We can either open up, open our hearts, realize that healing isn't necessarily always possible, right? Healing has become so endemic, this concept of healing. Look, sometimes we just need to wear our wounds on our chests and even still have that open. That's a lot harder than healing. Sometimes things can't be healed. Colonization can't be healed so easily. We can barely heal our interpersonal relationships with one another. Now that we've started this cutoff culture, this moralization of commodification culture, this psychology, pop psychology culture where it's too much emotional labor to have our communities to come together, our intercommunal communities, and to build those intercommunal relationships or interpersonal relationships. It's difficult. Okay, best friends break up. Okay, we have a culture where these psychologists, these feminist psychologists, have normalized this idea where you're supposed to break up with people because we have a very small group of men who have normalized this culture, right? And if we don't have community, if we don't do the hard work of community without getting paid for it, that's the key. We can't have a profit incentive ruining this, even if it's through grants. There's two paths. And the other path that we're going to take is much worse. We're going to have, instead of seeing affirmative action for what it is, we're going to have higher regulation, more bureaucracy, more standardization, more. We can go back to the handshaking, or we're going to increase our paperwork. And I'm saying I'm part of the is the handshake enough people. The handshake should be enough. We need to build that trust. We need to get rid of the paperwork. We need to get rid of the affirmative action. That's not how you heal. She explicitly says that her getting grant money is a form of reconciliation. When it's in fact, when you're repeating the party line, of course you'll get a grant. Of course you'll get grant money when you're repeating the party line, and when you've taken over the judicial system, and when you've taken over the psychology. But unfortunately, I don't think that we are able to really see complicity for what it is. And in fact, we're going to go down a much worse path. Carrie Bourassa, here, you've opened up the biggest example of a pathway out of this wokeness. And wokeness is a critique from the right. Virtue signaling is a critique from the right. These are words of the right, but they need to be used. They're outside. But the only possible critique of your own ideology comes from outside of your own ideology. And if we are going to be closed to that critique, we're going to go down an even worse path. And this is the beginning of cyberpunk, guys. This is the beginning of a very scary dystopia. These people have power over a lot of our lives, and they're going to make things a lot worse. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. The road to heaven, the gateway to heaven, is opened by the devil's advocate. We need to make friends with the devil's advocate. If there was one thing that integration rituals were about, Jungian integration rituals, which are usually a neoliberal cop-out, is to make friends with that devil. But we haven't been able to do that as a collective.
I'm pretty happy here. The reason I was happy there was because for one of the first times in the history of the Academy, they asked an Indigenous person to speak about Indigenous research ethics.
Oh!
I was pretty happy to have 3 whole minutes to speak about Indigenous research ethics. But I was shocked that I actually made a bit of an impact. When I was finished, it was dead silence, and I thought, oh wow, I really lost them. I lost them all. They don't know what I'm talking about. But I think that I actually did make an impact, because after I was finished and I went back and sat down, I had a lot of people coming and asking me questions. and saying that it's really important that what I spoke about and that they need to know more and they want to know more. And so
Yeah, she repeated some idioms and everyone was like, what the fuck? What are you talking about? So they asked her questions, but this is her interpretation of the situation.
perhaps this was going to be something very good for Indigenous communities across Canada. So it was an important time for me. I belong to the Gender Young Music Council number 34, but I really don't like to be put into boxes. So I'm Anishinaabe, I think it.
That was a spiritual thing right there, that glass.
Sometimes I get into trouble, but it's just how I feel. I think that we still live in a constant state.
That's just how I feel.
And I think that
I love to repeat idioms.
So I sometimes get
I have nothing original to say.
My grandfather pretty much raised me. I was born to teen parents who
Pretty much.
very much and very dearly, but we were very young. My mom was 15 when she got pregnant with me, barely 16 when she got pregnant. My grandfather had grade 2.
Some of this is probably true.
7 and my dad had grade 8. And for me, I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. And,
Yeah, you did. You definitely did.
But love only carries you so far. And so I can tell you without a doubt that if my grandfather had not paid
Love is not enough. Another idiom.
because then more
These people are vapid. They're just full of idioms.
violence. And I thought that was a normal thing. And I never ever thought about school or university or what even that was. But I did have my grandfather.
Again, this bullshit story again. This racist story.
I needed to keep me on the straight and narrow. And I can remember him telling me a great deal that I was going to be a doctor or a lawyer. And I can remember him whispering this to me in times of utter chaos when there was.
Look at this, repeating the same fucking bullshit story.
Him saying to me, whispering to me, you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. I had no idea what a lawyer was, by the way, but it sounded pretty good. So I would just be, he would make me repeat that to him. What are you going to be? Doctor or lawyer, doctor or lawyer. So I don't think I'm the kind of
That's probably something true there. There's something true probably there.
He passed away when I was 19. But
You're going to be a bullshitting doctor or lawyer.
I think it's the first time I had all cried in mentioning him. But if there's a picture of him up there, I would cry. And I cried at a large event a couple weeks ago. It was a big TV.
Oh, another crocodile tear situation.
Tuberculosis, and he had tuberculosis, and I had a picture of him up there. And there's, about 2,000 people in this auditorium, and I was crying because I still feel that close to him. Because I just feel like I wouldn't be really
I think that tuberculosis is her like Breaking Bad moment. When she's just like, fuck it, I'm just going to lie about everything. That's probably her Breaking Bad moment.
And I think that when you think about colonization and the impacts that we speak about today,
Let's
stop that cycle. And I think for the most part, I was able to stop a lot of the cycles.
Oh yeah.
You really do. It's not really.
Yeah, you reperpetuated the cycles in the most fucking manipulative snake-like way. That's your snake cycle.
I don't think we really thought about how intergenerational trauma is intersecting with ongoing colonization. And
Yeah. You're the ongoing colonization, Carrie.
To really pause and think about the fact that colonization is still occurring in Canada
Right now, as I speak.
And we're still struggling with that intergenerational trauma. And I don't want to make us victims because we're not. We're very, very, very resilient people.
Yeah, you're not victims. You're actively participating in the colonization.
And in fact,
It doesn't matter your skin color. That's what complicity is all about. That's the difficult part about complicity. Seeing that my great-great-great-grandfather was part of the oppression of my family.
Okay, so I'll get to what you really wanted me to talk about. I'm going to start about talking about what cultural safety is. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what is cultural safety, because when people hear that word, they immediately go to culture. It's actually not about culture. And even when we talk about social determinants of health or indigenous social determinants of health, my colleague, Barry Lavalley, who if you haven't heard of him, look him up. He's amazing. Does lots of anti-discrimination work and lots of anti-racism work. And I'm so honored to be able to work with him, to learn from him. He's amazing. He works at the University of Minnesota right now. And,
We need to end this anti-racism crap. Okay? Yeah, we need to be anti-racist, but in an authentic way. Not in the way, in a very particular way, in your own way. Not through intersectionality.
If you think about it, for Indigenous people, the social determinants of health are things like colonization, racism, geographical location.
Idioms.
Now, what are you saying?
Repeating the same fucking things. What are you saying? I'm saying the fucking same things I've heard everybody else say. I have no fucking critical capacity for my own self.
Aboriginal ancestry is a determinant of health either. That means that negative as well, right? So I think it's important that we think about what are those social determinants of health for Indigenous people, because they're a little bit different for us. Some of them are the same income, for example. Education is important, but keep in mind that some are very, very different. And colonization is one of those things that we have to take into consideration.
Oh, one of the things.
It's actually about some very, very...
It's like the main fucking thing.
Includes systemic issues, systemic racism, bias, stigma, all those things I was talking about at the start.
Idioms, repeating the same fucking shit.
Very, very such, I think we have to, actually get rid of...
My grant writing skills are really good.
Emerged in New Zealand by the mountains.
Yeah.
So we can't really...
Okay, so...
But we can do is act. So I think... what we
She did do some research.
And anti-racism.
She appropriates some research.
So cultural safety really, the importance of why we say cultural safety is because it actually encompasses all the other processes that have occurred over time. So we used to do cultural awareness sessions, for example, right? And cultural competency sessions. And now there's cultural humility. And the thing is, the great thing about cultural safety is that if you're doing it right, it encompasses all of those things. Right?
Oh.
Understand about cultural safety. Cultural
It's holistic.
It takes us beyond cultural awareness, which is really the acknowledgement of difference. And it's important, it's an important start. But if you're only doing cultural awareness, then you're missing the systemic part of it. So the importance of cultural safety is that it takes into account all of those things, and you should, in fact, if you were undertaking cultural safety, you would have all of those pieces enshrined in basically a work plan, right, of how to address, all of those issues. Because you would need that. You would need the education piece. But education in and of itself is not going to address systemic racism. It'll be a piece of it, but you need much more than that. So it surpasses cultural sensitivity as well. Right? The cultural sensitivity days, I'm sure there's many of you in here that do cultural sensitivity training too as well. That's a piece of it, and that recognizes that importance of respecting difference. But cultural safety will encompass that as well. And cultural safety really helps us
Notice?
understand, I guess, the limitations.
I don't know. I haven't seen her critique anything. She's just repeating things. She never critiques anything.
Attitudes of practitioners. So now you're getting a little closer to the safety piece, but not quite there yet. Cultural safety.
She's so vapid.
Actually predicated on understanding power differentials, and now we're getting somewhere.
Okay.
Because it really is about power.
Now it's 2018.
Systemic issues in general.
It's 2018, so now she's talking about this stuff more.
Practitioners, and it's hard work to do. But practitioners, whether you're an educator, whether you're a physician, whether you're a nurse, you have power. As an academic, I am position even though I'm 19. As a professor, I'm in a power position.
Thanks. Basic intersectional stuff. Fuck.
Right? What are my biases? What do I have to do? Right? And that is really important because as an academic, I'm in a power position.
As a bullshitter.
It's important to understand power. And there are power positions in justice system, there are power positions in academia, there are power positions in the justice system. So pick your system, pick your power position. Right? So it's really important to understand that. So I'm using sort of, in this scenario, patient-centered approach. If you're in academia, use an educator-centered approach. It applies to different systems.
It's student-centered approach, you fucking
So if I'm using
ignoramus, not educator-centered approach.
So if you're looking at a patient-centered approach, self-reflection is important. And
I'm an educator, by the way. That's why I know that.
Self-reflection as a professor.
Oh yeah, self-reflection. Let's go dig deep. Let's dig deep into my bullshit and put two hands into my bullshit and just
So think of a time when you
just smell it.
probably imagine where you can see somebody that's in a power position that has affected you.
Oh.
So I think it's important for us to look from both sides. So cultural safety essentially focuses on systemic issues, including colonial-based racism. And there is a lot of work, of course, in the healthcare system, but more and more work is now being done around cultural safety, the justice field, and in education fields.
She never specifically talks about anything. It's all just vapid general.
Insert,
And that everybody can agree to. There's nothing that anybody can disagree to. Except me, because I disagree with the fucking whole thing now.
safe service or safety in general. And that is really, it's flipping the script, right? That's really the important piece here. And this will then open up the opportunities to learn about Indian history. So remember at the start I said the history piece is important. It's that truth piece that is absolutely essential.
The truth is so important. You gotta pick up the truth and smell it, and then smear it all over your fucking face.
Well, I think applies whether you're looking at education or whether you're looking at justice. And for me, health is everything. Health is education.
Health is everything.
Health isn't just this, quadrant on.
What did I say about wearing your wounds?
So for me,
that's really what healthy is.
Health is everything. And my background is, as you probably know, I was
acknowledging unhealing wounds.
I came from political science. I came from doing 2 degrees of political science, and I did a social studies degree. I'm not a nurse.
Yeah, we're gonna go through that. By the way, we're gonna go through your fucking stupid thesis.
Everything is everywhere. Right? And I think that is, that also comes from many, philosophies in terms of health as well. Anyway, but I think sometimes
the word philosophy It's a Western word. It's a form of Latinization to apply it to other cultures.
Looking from a healthcare lens, but again, I just want to remind you this can be anywhere.
Philosophia.
Family members, health patients, communities, again, students. What matters most to you in terms of whether it is, in this case, in the healthcare setting, the illness treatment, but in terms of how to address power differentials, how to start to address the systemic issues in the system, and this can be
how to address system issues within the system. There's all these connections and networks, and there's a system.
But it's starting to see things in a different way.
Cultural shift. We need an epistemic reconstitution. I'm much better at idiomatic fucking bullshit than she is. Where is the critical juncture by which we can find the epistemic reconstitution here? Okay? Once we recognize the systemic influences.
And again, their recommendations,
Empty words.
I guess in essence, reconciliation cannot happen until we have the truth addressed.
Exactly, lady.
So many Canadians do not know the truth, and truth is
the truth is that you're from fucking Russia, pretending to be indigenous.
Just a reminder that it is so very important.
It's so important. So important. Without the truth, there's no reconciliation. Without talking about what the truth is, there's no reconciliation. That's my point.
Very important point about reconciliation. If we looked at the language around the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples,
oh my God, the ultimate colonialism.
Under proclaimed a historic law of authentic rights and
United Nations bullshit.
Under it basically says it all, that Indigenous peoples have rights. We have rights to our lands, and if we just...
It says it all. It speaks for everyone. The United Nations speaks for everyone.
We would have a right. And if you look at under, when you look at the language, which I probably should have put the entire language there, but they nailed it.
They nailed it.
It's there. Language is there.
Yeah. If you're a grant writer, yes, they nailed it, and that's probably what you use to fucking get your grants all the time.
So, if you can flip the...
Go back to the handshake comments.
And some of you may know this, and maybe you'll be adding to what I say and having more information than what I have. But I do want to give a little bit of a summary of Canadian Indigenous colonial history.
Okay.
It starts with a little bit of terminology, and I'm going to go as fast as I can through those questions. But I think it's really important to have some of that truth that I'm talking about. So in terms of defining...
We need a good shot of truth from this person.
Colonial term. Aboriginal is a term that was crafted by the federal government without any input from First Nation, Métis, Inuit people at all. It excludes non-status First Nations people.
Okay, I'm going to skip these basic history bullshit that she's repeating.
So I know.
Here she says something interesting. She says that she doesn't like the word Aboriginal.
Section 35.1 of the Canadian Constitution. And it starts with a little bit of terminology, and I'm going to go as fast as I can through these questions, but I think it's really important to have that truth that I'm talking about.
Okay. Sorry, I skipped this.
Aboriginal people. Aboriginal is, in my opinion, a colonial term.
Oh, it's a colonial term.
Aboriginal is a term that was crafted by the federal government with input from First Nation, Métis, Inuit people at all. It excludes non-status First Nations people.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's a colonial term.
However,
it is defined and enshrined within Section 35.1 of the Canadian Constitution. And so I know, and I respect this, that there are many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people who prefer the term Aboriginal. And I respect that. I'm not one of them because I feel that it is exclusionary and I feel that it's colonial.
Oh, that's exclusionary. Okay.
It is defined legally as Indian, Inuit, and Métis people of Canada. There are supposed to be rights attached to the term Aboriginal. For the most part, they are fairly vague. And
just like your whole fucking life and all the presentations that you do. And just like your grant writing.
I guess make them specific. So Indigenous people are very diverse, and I use the term Indigenous. I see it as a much more inclusive term.
Yeah, I include people from Russia
Indigenous people are those who are descendants from and identify with original inhabitants of a particular region, in contrast to groups who have settled, occupied, or colonized the area more recently. And again, it's much more international. Some people don't like this term. I prefer it because, again, I think it is much more inclusive. But our identities have been shaped, and they continue to be shaped by colonial and neo-colonial policy. And I think I'm being a bit kind here when I say that the attempted assimilation, which I actually think is genocide.
You're doing that.
But particularly women, and I'll show you why. You want to flip it?
I'll show you why. Because I have to repeat the idioms.
It remains that we have an Indian Act that continues on, and it continues to affect particularly First Nations people, but inadvertently it affects Métis people as well. And between 1876 and non-status First Nations also. So between 1876 and 1985, one's Indianness, if you will, was traced to the male line. Many of you probably are aware of this. And I'm going to use the term Indian only in a legal sense. I think most people, that term is not used very often, but so just so you know it, so I'm using a very legal term. It is still a legal term in Canada.
Yeah, because there's a whole argument about who is included and who's excluded in these conversations. And if your great great grandmother was, brutalized, let's say, by a settler, and then that makes you, 1/18th Métis. There's a whole. I have no right to talk about this topic, but for me, the whole fucking affirmative action thing needs to be thrown out the window. We need a much better system than what's going on currently, and the system that makes people like Carrie Bourassa come into sociopathic positions of power.
And it really affects them, right? So it's still based on community. Right now, I'll tell you a little joke from an elder, because elders tend to share stories that will make you laugh but also make you think. And way back in the day, produces, ta-da, a 6-1. So in 1985, if you were 6-1, it meant you were a status Indian, on or before. That exacerbated the problem. Now here's the revision. If those brave women who marched on Ottawa had actually revised it the way they wanted to, it would not look like this. Because here's the revision. So as of 1985, you no longer could gain or lose status through marriage.
So here she's talking about the complications with regards to status.
So now you were either a 6-1 or a 6-2 Indian under the Act. You were assigned that status, but it didn't refer to height, because I know lots of 6'5". If you were 6'1", it meant you were a status Indian on or before 1985.
So here she's talking about the complications when it comes to status.
So you have to apply to regain your status, and 9 times out of 10 you were assigned a 6'2" status. Very rarely were you assigned a 6'1" status. Sometimes you were, but most often you were assigned 6'2". Now, why is that important? Because we're doing a little bit of Indian Act math. Now, I apologize to the mathematicians, it's just that I'm not very good at math, and so my friend and I, when we used to do Aboriginal awareness sessions, we didn't like math, we weren't good at it, so we called this Indian Act math. Now, a 6'1" plus a non-status, now non-status could be a Métis or an Inuit as well. So a 6'1" plus a non-status didn't affect individuals, but it produced a 6'2" child. Okay, so you don't have to be married, but just if a child, happen, it was 6'2". Okay, now another generation. So say that 6'2" grows up, has relations with another non-status, that produces a non-status child. 2 generations, you lose status. Okay. Now remember when I said assimilation ended in 1973? What does that look like? Looks like assimilation to me. So it might not affect individuals, but it sure affected the family. And then here's where it gets really strange and why I call it Indian Act math. Because a 6'1" plus a 6'2" produces, ta-da, a 6'1" child. Okay, I don't know how, but it's magic. And a 6'2" plus a 6'2" child produces, ta-da, a 6'1". So what I found really interesting is that I happened to be on the plane, and I ended up sitting by a person who, I still have his card, but he happened to work for Indian Women Affairs. I don't know how we got onto this subject. We started talking about this whole 6'1", 6'2". He said, oh, I was working for the government when this was introduced. So I started asking him questions. And he said, yeah, I was in on this whole discussion when this policy came up. And he said, do you want to know what it was based on? And I said, I would love to know. It was based on how cattle were bred. You can imagine how I had to really hold my emotions in, because I wanted to find out as much as I could about this policy. But he was really quite proud of it because he thought it was very ingenious how they came up with that policy. It really shouldn't have surprised me. I don't think so much, except for that it was, like 2007. We're in the 2000s, right? Not the 1800s or 1700s, where you can tell, oh, in their shoes, I've done this, I've done that. Yeah, you work in their shoes and you don't know how it was, and you don't understand, the extent of the brutality of the colonial system. And that's not even to say
you weren't in their shoes either, bitch.
For generations, and people would come home and their kids would be unable to even speak in their language or remember the things that their parents.
Yeah, it is a fucking terrible atrocity which you're contributing to.
The system played a huge role in ensuring that the Indian Age was firmly implanted in the control of the reserves. So the residential schools started from the mid-1800s to 1996. The last one was closed in Saskatchewan in 1996. And as I said, they were unable to hire lawyers starting in 1920 to 1951. There were some major revisions in the Act in 1951. Prohibition of ceremonies and dress started in 1884 to 1951. The only exception was the minister could give exceptions when the Queen came to visit and they wanted to see First Nations sort of dressed up, and at the exception of those
dressed up
and have them at their ceremonies, or dressed up not for the ceremonies, but they would bring them to the Queen, which was also an embarrassment, right? Like parade them around at will. And Indian Age really did control every aspect of life, and there was a work for rations policy instituted in 1879. So even if you were very elderly, if you were sick or infirm, so say that I wanted to go and do the rations for my cooking, that was not allowed. And this again goes back to the social Darwinian policy that, it was the survival of the fittest, and if those people couldn't, do the work for their rations, and if they died, they died. And there is again a lot of literature around this, a lot of documentation that was a policy that if they were too infirm, that's just too bad, and they don't live.
She's talking about very real issues.
Just also to add that you also lost your status if you pursued higher education.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. If you wanted to pursue any kind of higher education, you lost your status. If you went and fought in the wars, which we just had Remembrance Days, and I was watching all of the First Nations veterans who went to war and they came back only to lose their status. Treated terribly after they came out of the war. They didn't get any kind of
it's the worst kind of crocodile tear there is.
Yeah, benefits that other veterans received. In fact, it was almost worse for them because then they couldn't even go back to.
I guess she believes in her lies.
Even if you're on status, you can't go back to your reserve.
She thinks of herself as a good and empathetic person.
And fought and endured, the horrors of war, and then they came.
Beware of people who think of themselves as being good people.
So there was a whole number of ways that they would try to entice First Nations to give up their status as well. Physical environments, employment, income, education, and food insecurity, those are vitally important. And the intermediate determinants of health, such as healthcare, educational systems, community infrastructure, resources, capacities, environmental stewardship, and cultural continuity, those are vitally important.
This is by far the best lecture she's given.
Been spending a lot of time talking about colonialism, racism, social exclusion, and self-determination.
Back to the idioms.
Absolutely vitally important. And you put those together, and I think you have a complex framework to work from. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on the stats, but I do have them here, just to sort of show you that
she's a good presenter.
A lot of issues to deal with, but we have really a lot of resilience and a lot of strength. And I think that anything we do has to come from strength and not focus on negativity, but certainly to understand that. Our population.
Another pop psychology.
If you flip, we do have certainly a lot of issues to address. Let's take it again. Our life expectancy, for example, is still not very high. Preventable deaths, for example, circulatory diseases and injury account for 50% of all preventable deaths. I think that we really have to address some of these issues. Our suicide rates are still very high. Our common causes of death. Our primary cause of death for children less than 10 is unintentional, which means accidents. We still have a lot of work to do, but we have so much in our community. We have so much strength. We have so much resilience, and we have to start to focus on how can we address some of these issues through the strength of our communities. I think you can take this again. I mean, we could have all my slides, but obviously HIV is still an issue, particularly for Indigenous women in Canada. I think the biggest elephant in the room, though, if I may, is where we started at the beginning, and that is systemic racism. I think I've been asked.
I thought the elephant in the room was something different. Sorry.
When they say that, they mean geographical access, but I actually think the bigger problem is access to healthcare in terms of safety, in terms of Indigenous people feeling safe to, walk into a clinic and not feel stigmatized or not experience racism. And I think that we have to do better, not only in healthcare systems, but in our education systems. I've been hearing stories of students not feeling welcome in a classroom, students not feeling like they want to ask questions. We have to create safe spaces in our communities for Indigenous people, full stop. Whether that is in a healthcare clinic, whether
Why is it that people don't want to speak?
This is 2018, and I think cultural safety is a top of the moment topic because it is really important for us to start deconstructing the systems that we live in, and they are
Deconstructing.
The sooner we come face to face with
Derrida is turning in his grave.
that's really, really what I want to talk about today. The last point I want to make on this is that, colonial history is a process, and it has disconnected many of us from our communities, from our languages, from our cultures, and I think that for the most part, many of us.
When everybody repeats the same thing and you're not critical, you're complicit.
And so, like I said, I think taking community engagement approaches, ensuring that we're taking direction from communities in whatever we're doing, whether it's research, whether it's in academia.
Again, repeating the same crap.
Just a reminder for me is that our knowledge keepers are PhDs, they're the real PhDs, and we still have so much to learn from them. And for me, it's important that we acknowledge that and that we remember, where our roots are. Life education, employment, working conditions, food security, healthcare services, housing, income distribution, social safety net, social exclusion, inclusion, unemployment, and employment security. I think some of those are valid, but not all of those. If you flip it, the Canadian Institute for Health Information has said that social and economic conditions actually have a profound impact on the health of Aboriginal peoples and the contemporary health of well-being must be viewed in a broad historical and social context. And I think that's really what I was trying to provide today is that we can't blame.
Let's contextualize.
That doesn't do us any good, but having that context is vitally important. Okay. So here's where I sit on this. I think that Indigenous social determinants of health.
So let's go to 112.
Where our roots are. I think I'm almost done, so that we can have just some. So about 30 minutes or so for a few stats on Trinity Christian families. She is to continue to be compulsory. We're performing similar, the contemporary issues. Part of it is looking at determinants of health, and Health Canada they look at issues of globalization, migration, cultural continuity, colonization, territory access, poverty, and so.
Okay, here it is.
Not everybody may agree with me either. That's the other point. The reason I don't see it as a determinant of health is that I think it can be used in a negative way. That your indigeneity somehow is a determinant of your health. It's one thing to declare if you're Indigenous. That's one thing. I think that's important. I think for me, if I'm for example, if I'm in the hospital, I have no problem identifying that I'm Indigenous. But to say that's a
she has no problem with identifying that she's Indigenous.
So I think there has to be a really clear understanding. That there's
a very clear understanding.
Identifying as Indigenous, I think, is important. More specifically, First Nation, Métis, or Inuit, because I think getting a good understanding of the people you're serving is very important. When you talk about patient-oriented care.
She has definitely a good understanding of the people she's supposed to be serving.
Before they started counting accurate information in hospitals, they used to only have First Nation because they could have the card, the card so that they could get paid basically. I would kind of a little box under there and I put Métis beside and then I check the box and I knew they weren't really going to do anything with that, but somehow it made me feel better so that it was a message to say, you really should be counting, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people, right? That you should be, providing patient-oriented care. And anyway, so to me that is important.
So she's been a sociopath for a very long time.
To self-declare, and not everybody will, but I think that there's good ways to do it, and there's bad ways to do it.
Okay, so now we're just going to take a look at her thesis here. I tried to look at these guys, their supervisors. Nobody here has anything particularly of interest. They just seem to be some sort of bureaucrats. And nobody has anything super interesting to delve into. There is a paucity. Who starts their essay like this? A paucity of Métis specific. A paucity. What the hell is that? Smallness. A paucity. Fewness. Dearth. Of Métis specific socioeconomic and health data available to Métis people, communities, and organizations. This study examines the relevant raw data from 2001 Census, 2001 Aboriginal People Survey, and the Canadian Health Survey Nutrition General Components. Several statistical analyses reveal that Métis people do not enjoy the same socioeconomic or health status as other Canadians. Okay. Specifically, the study reveals that Métis have lower total average incomes as well as wages and salaries than non-Aboriginal people. Okay, the examination addresses a gap in knowledge and serves as a starting point for future research. Okay. So first she acknowledges all the people who helped her get into that. My wonderful husband, Chad. Thank you for your support and unconditional love. Okay. Let's go and check out her PhD paper. List of abbreviations. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful work here. Okay, I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger. All right. Preface. This dissertation is the beginning. Okay. It is the first of what I will hope be many research projects undertaken in my academic paper, projects that will assist Métis communities in their pursuit of justice. As a Métis woman in academia, I have felt that it is my responsibility to my community to advocate with and for them. You know, that's it. She realized that there's a gap here and that she can fill. I have engaged in community-based research with them in hopes that it will assist Métis people in their lobbying and advocacy efforts. I believe that someday research will assist them. But one problem now is that there is simply not enough relevant and useful data and evidence readily available. Qualitative research is very important. It gives voice to Métis community members and can transfer knowledge and skills at a grassroots level so that they can continue to use research to affect change. Wonderful. However, I have been in the room when my fellow Métis community members have been told by a municipal, provincial, or federal government representative that they must prove that a particular program is needed in the community. This is a frustrating experience, one that is being articulated qualitative. Okay, but I have come to realize that the quality work itself will not be adequate when it comes to lobbying governments and other granting agencies. So she saw a gap here right away in her PhD. Oh man, so although I do not have a strong quantitative research background, I realized that for this dissertation I needed to undertake a quantitative analysis. Both qualitative and quantitative research can support advocacy. We live in a time in which people are beginning to speak of advocacy research. Advocacy research is intended to facilitate social change and social justice. Advocacy research is explicit. Okay, that's somebody else. Advocacy research is particularly important because it examines the efforts of colonialism in contemporary terms and gives voice to those most affected by it. Again, it's just so much idioms, just so much repeating of the same stuff. Post-colonial theory. Their point is that post-colonialism is a political and cultural movement that challenges the received histories and ideologies of former colonial nations. Importantly, advocacy research makes use of critical theory in that it challenges social categories and systems of privilege and power. It recognizes the process of othering. You know, all of these things are criticized now. All of these idioms are criticized now. Edward Said. No. She's citing Edward Said. They note the self and the other are constructed when those with power construct themselves as worthy and superior by constructing those who they dominate as different and inferior. Is rooted in a patriarchal, racist, colonial past. Damn, she's citing the same person right now. Sherlyn and Harper. Sherlyn. Why is she's just citing one person right now? Let's look at her citations here. Okay. This is a 257. This is 257 pages. Let's look at this. Oh my God. Iris Young. Great. Wilkinson. Let's take a look at all these. Patriarchy and Paternalism, the Legacy of the Canadian State for First Nation Women. Psychological Distresses and Perceived Health Status, 1978, 1997. These are all really old. I want to see if there's any, like, substantial... Edward Said, here, that's a substantial work. It's basically just Edward Said here. Let's see. It's all really dry citations. Old citations. I guess her paper is in 2008, but she doesn't have anything. She's a good researcher. I mean, I'll give you that. I mean, it's not too bad. There's nothing actually substantial in terms of, like, hear me hold. Like real books. They're mostly just papers. Health Canada. Hey, look, some Paulo Freire. If you want to learn about how neoliberalism can co-opt even anybody, just look at how Paulo Freire is totally within the institution today. Within the colonial institution. Within the neoliberal colonial institution. Conway. That's it. Not much, not too many. Yeah, the Sacred Tree. There are a couple of substantial works here, but not too much. Balibar. Man, all of these people. Baldwin. D. Baldwin. Not James. Interesting, interesting. Oh, look at this. She has like, she puts formulas in her paper. I wonder if anybody actually read this. Okay. I mean, I get the problem. Let's look at the conclusion. A bunch of appendices. Personal parting thoughts. This study was undertaken with hope that the socioeconomic circumstances and health issues faced by the Métis people would be brought to light. As a Métis woman, I've too often heard people tell me that the Métis are doing fine. That in fact, there are really no issues to talk about. I hope that this study has dispelled these myths. I had also hoped to provide, as a first step, some valuable information for Métis communities and organizations across Canada. The fact that so little data exists it is very difficult for these busy agencies to locate them. Part of the problem is that they do not have ownership, control, or access or possession to their own data. Isn't that a lot of what she said? We do need more reliable Métis-specific data, but at this point, even access to the existing data would be a good starting point. So basically, she saw a weakness, and then she put herself there, in the middle of the whole situation. On a personal note, I hope that the question of Métis definition is put aside so that important issues outlined in this study can be furthered and examined and acted upon. Yeah, because her idea of Métis definition probably includes Russian citizens. RCAP noted that in 1996 that the Supreme Court would more than likely end up ruling on the issue of Métis definitions. Although the Pauli decision did not contain such a ruling, the Supreme Court did outline how Métis community can be confirmed. Their description is very similar to how Métis locals define their membership. I believe it is time to work together as Métis people, regardless of whether we are from the Métis Nation or identify as other Métis. I think that's how she defines herself, as other Métis. We are all brothers and sisters, and we face the same iniquities that can only be addressed when we work together. Finally, I believe that as Métis people, we cannot rely on the various levels of government or even our own Métis leadership for change. We must take responsibility and not only identify the issues, but engage every stakeholder we can to address them. Oh man. I believe that a contemporary example of internal oppression is the continuing debate over Métis definition. Communities who know who their members are, and they have established both written and oral methods of identifying members. By continuing this debate, we are excluding our own brothers and sisters and allowing the federal government in particular to continue to ignore us. After all, if we can't agree on who we are, why should they bother with us at all? It is true that we are very diverse, but we have our own, we all have our ancestral connection and our acceptance by our communities. These aspects, along with self-identification, provide the basis of attaining Métis membership in most communities. In quarreling about how to define ourselves, we are legitimizing the system that oppresses us, and we are becoming oppressors in our own rights. Man, there's a lot of gold in here. And we are becoming oppressors in our own rights. Furthermore, we are forgetting about the needs of our people. This study demonstrates that Métis people do not enjoy the same socioeconomic circumstances or health status compared to our non-Aboriginal counterparts. These are everyday real-life issues that people face each morning when they wake up. I highly doubt they wake up and think, I wonder if the issue of Métis definition has been solved yet. They more than likely wake up wondering how to pay for the prescription they need, or how they will get to work that day, or worry that they have to send their children bangs and lard for lunch, and how embarrassed their children might be that they can't take tuna salad like the other kids. These are the issues that all of us, Métis and non-Métis alike, need to think about. These are the issues we need to resolve together. Oh, man. These people just create ideological worlds for themselves. The idea of drawing breath, this is from Listening to the Beat of Our Drum. The idea of drawing breath as a sacred ceremony is an important one. The process of colonization have taken over hundreds of years and over many generations. Some argue it has not ended. Obviously, it has not ended. Neocolonialism continues as policies and legislation target indigenous people and control our lives. Canada remains one of the few countries in the world that continues to define its indigenous people in legislation. This on its own causes identity confusion, loss, and displacement within families and communities. Martin Hill notes that we must rebuild our relationships together as women and learn to respect one another's sacred spaces. She contends that we must see ourselves as sacred women and mothers. Assuming traditional roles as mothers may mean different things to each of us. That's not tradition. But she points out that the mothers were essentially teachers, whereas children were taught and raised collectively. So however you choose to carry that out in today's modern society, fast-paced world, is up to you. What is important is that we reclaim our identities. What is important is that we retake our identities, our sacredness. We are the carriers of our culture. It is our responsibility to share it with our children, even if we do so by learning it with them and by reclaiming it with them. Anderson reminds us that motherhood, both in practice and as an ideology, was the source of indigenous female authority in the family and in the governance of our pre-colonial nations. Contemporary indigenous peoples now call on these teachings as part of the political discourse related to healing and rebuilding. Colonization affected gender roles and relations and continues to today. Unfortunately, patriarchy still dominates in many of our communities, and women's roles are not valued beyond childbearing. For mothers' roles to be truly valued, men must honor mothers' roles in their entirety, not merely for our ability to give birth. We must expect more of our men and reclaim our roles, our identities as the sacred women and mother. So this text starts out, it says, this chapter explores my personal experiences of becoming an indigenous mother, as well as traditional mothering and parental practices. Oh man, I wonder what's going to happen to her child.
And I think that's one of the greatest, like in the medical system, like that's true for everyone, right? So they come in with this stereotype and they think, oh, well, okay, well, I'm going to offer you this and I'm going to help you with this. But you've actually just insulted me, like you greatly insulted me. And I went home to my husband and I was like, like I was hurt because like how could you assume that of me? Like I didn't say anything about that. Like assume that kind of,
look at how she preys on
I think
traumatized people.
Like introducing that into curriculums and being like, remember that like even though you think you're helping, you might actually be doing more detriment than help. So I think that's really important.
You think you're helping, but you're probably doing more detriment than.
For a second, like, is this going to help them? Even though it's got great benefits, is it going to help them or going to be detrimental to them?
Yeah, think for a second, Carrie.
One more question or comment. I just want to follow up that conversation with comments and feel free to add to that. The issue of social safety is systemic. It's not individualized. And
everybody's repeating these idioms. It's really disgusting. Our collective hive mind is unable to, and they all say it's critical thinking when they're all repeating the same thing.
And the teacher was talking about some conflict between the settlers and indigenous people. And he asked my son, why were the Indians afraid and why did they run away? And that was totally inappropriate for him, for that question to be asked of him, and for him to be expected to represent all indigenous people.
Yeah, it's really, and especially if you're not indigenous. Oh my God.